So this is our second session on this book by Heidegger, Essence of Truth, 3031 version of it, going through Plato's allegory of the cave, and now we're getting his take on Plato's idea of the good, as well as the question concerning the essence of untruth. And the latter half of this book gives his reading of the Theaetetus, Platonic dialogue of Theaetetus. We're going to interrupt reading this book to read the Theaetetus itself. Pete had suggested this Joe Sachs translation, and I've gotten it and been perusing it. It's a good translation. We should definitely, I do recommend we use this one. So you can find it. I'll put up a link on it for next time for Amazon. I'm thinking we're going to go through the dialogue until the point where Theaetetus passes the torch to his teacher Theodorus, and Theodorus takes over the conversation. It's about 2/3 of the way through the discussion of the Protagoras thesis. But anyway, we'll have details of that for next time. But we're going to be reading from this translation in the Theaetetus next. It'll probably be 2 or 3 sessions to cover the Theaetetus before we get back to the Essence of Truth one. So for this time, our reading was just parts 2 and 3 of this. So part 1, sections 2 and 3, the idea of the good unhiddenness and the question concerning the essence of untruth. That takes us to about page 118 from page 77. So about 40 odd pages of this. And the topics are, we had just finished his discussion of the whole actual allegory of the cave. Now he's going to try to explain what that means, in part by focusing on the third stage of what is this realm of the ideas we're going out into. And to do that, he goes back to the end of book 6 instead of the allegory of the cave itself, where the idea of the good as beyond being is discussed in Plato's Republic. So that's the section of Plato he's thinking about. He doesn't go all the way back to the beginning of the discussion of the good at the end of book 6, and he leaves out the stuff at the end of book 6 on the divided line. He just focuses on the stuff about the idea of the good itself late in book 6 of the Republic, between that and the allegory of the cave, right before the allegory of the cave. Actually, the divided line comes right before the allegory of the cave, so he skips over that a little bit. And then his own version of if we can put it, the problematic of thinking about aletheia as unhiddenness and the different senses of truth that he is tracing to different senses of untruth, analyzing how the notion of what counts as true is changing as the thing that is being contrasted with is changing, which is sort of the subject of section 3. All right, we got so many people, so if people don't know the format, we typically go around and ask people first if they manage to do the reading, any past familiarity with the texts here, whether the Plato text or the Heidegger text, and then first impressions. Sometimes we come back around for first impressions, but these days we're just doing first impressions along with. So that's good. What I want to start on doing. Before then, just briefly previewing what we might do next time. I also have one other sort of textual thing about a reading, which I wish I had told you about last time, but I only noticed it a little bit later. There's some places in our reading where the Greek words are just typeface wrong. This is not a matter of Heidegger or anything like that. It's pure textual emendation, kind of textual criticism. Somebody with a set of type things, when he was laying out the thing, put the Greek letters upside down, or thought he had. The point is, there's a bunch of places where there's supposed to be a G, a gamma in Greek, and instead there's a lambda. So you get allothou instead of agathou, and you get an L at the start of the word gnosis, which is a little bit weird. Anyway, there's about a half a dozen of those. Zygon for yoke becomes xylon, which is an actual word in Greek, but it means something different. Although they both mean, wooden objects of some symbolic significance. But anyway, there's it's noticeable. I count at least 7 occasions where this happens. If anyone else is reading along in the Greek, they'll notice that. If you're doing whole word reading, you correct it automatically, because there's no way you can spell logos lolos. You just automatically read the whole word as logos. but if anyone else is having trouble with it, that could be confusing. Anyway, just want to get that aside. I think all the instances I saw were between pages 78 and 111. If you find it somewhere else, anyway, that's just I don't think any of this is in Plato or Heidegger or anything else. It's just the typesetter between us and the original text. Okay, Chuck, do you manage to do the reading and any of that stuff?
No, I've been terribly personally busy with other stuff, so I'll have to catch up. In the meantime, I expect this time, not having attended last time or listened to the recording, to still benefit from the wise commentary of others who participate.
Thank you. So as Jack mentioned, one of the things we do is we record these and put them up on YouTube for people to go over later. Put it as a link below the session. After the session, takes a few hours for it to render, but those are all up there. And if you want to go back and look at previous things there, you can find it off the channel. One other question for Chuck. I know you haven't done this reading before, but how long has it been since have you read Plato's Republic, Book 6, and that sort of thing? Do you have any idea?
It's been a long time since I read any Plato. I did have a course at undergraduate level. Well, it was an undergraduate course as I took it in that time frame 30 years ago on the Republic. And it was a general course on the Republic. So we didn't focus in any great detail on specific aspects of the Republic, which could be highly controversial.
Okay, yeah.
Highly intensely puzzling. I was, as usual, following along with the discussions, since philosophy is not my normal academic routine. Political science is. So.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, Pete.
So I read it. I got done over a week ago. And then I was going to go back over some passages. I wasn't quite comfortable with the one at the beginning where he has the triangle of the different types of light and stuff. But then I got a new PC with Windows 11, and I've discovered Linux VMs, and I got completely distracted by that and didn't go back to the reading. So yeah, I finished it, but not as thoroughly as I would have liked.
Fair enough. Okay, and level of familiarity with these parts of the Republic before all this?
I had read them and read about them from other people before.
Gotcha. But not terribly recently, or?
Yeah, I haven't read Plato's Republic directly for over 10 years or so.
Gotcha. Okay. Carlos.
This is my first exposure to Plato's Republic. I did read the piece, and throughout I was wondering about the misspellings, and I was wondering if that was Heidegger, the publisher, or what, but you explained the situation. I counted 8 pages with problems, but anyway.
Well, there's at least one place where they get it right twice and wrong once in the same paragraph, like sometimes in 2 lines each other. So I think it's got to be a typesetter thing.
Yeah. I find it hard to believe that Heidegger didn't know how to spell Greek, but
yeah, it's definitely not Heidegger, but the fact that it can happen so close to each other in the same paragraph tells me that it was a manual error, not a software error. And the fact that a lambda and a gamma look very similar if you flip them over, I think means it was actually a physical typesetting error, is my guess. But I don't know at what stage.
One of the things that I found myself battling with that I didn't anticipate, not battling, but continuously paying attention to the contamination in my mind of the word good. And he actually very specifically in some paragraph says, don't go there. And it's hard not to. And there's this underlying current to give you an idea what good is, the moral, the ethical, and so on. And that's not what he's talking about at all. And I'm wondering what agathon really means in Greek. Does that translate into something that that we have in English that's not the good, it's something else?
Well, agathon just means good in Greek. It means the good,
Okay.
but the aga prefix is like really a lot of something. There's a lot of other similar words and constructions in Greek, which are
Okay.
very, very, Agamemnon means very steadfast.
Oh,
So anything which is very, very, right?
aga.
The very, very has an aga in front. But the otherwise what it is, it's just good. But it's a very, very kind of thing. But it's a fair question. As to how much there's a moral meaning, I think that Heidegger is right to kind of ward people away from reading too much of the 19th century moral meaning into it, and he dismisses it as not something for aunties. He says, but Plato may be a little bit more of an auntie than Heidegger is. Plato is less. I'm sorry. There's some interruption. There's Plato is less inclined to completely divorce discussion of the good from discussions of morals or morality or human conduct than Heidegger is. I think that Heidegger is right to focus on the idea of the good in this part of the Republic as being primarily a kind of metaphysical idea or part of metaphysical structure idea in Plato, but it's also happening in the middle of a book called The Republic. And it's happening right after he had a very moral discussion of how people don't manage to understand what the good is. Socrates, in the course of all this, has begged off from what Glaucon asked him. Glaucon wanted to ask him, "What do you think the good is?" And he says, "Well, I can't tell you that. I don't know." And he says, "Well, why don't you just tell me what you suppose about it instead of pretending that you know?" And he says, "Well, if I just give you my opinion about it without any sight, that's like, a blind man who happens to take the right road, and it's a very ugly thing," and so forth. He kind of begs off by claiming ignorance, right? And he also at one point says that to really go into everything I think about that would take us beyond what we can talk about here, or something like that. And then he says, "So I'm going to tell you not about the good, but about the child of the good." And then he tells this whole story of the two corresponding triangles that we've got from Heidegger reasonably faithfully. But before that, there's a discussion of the good in these purely moral philosophy terms. So it's not completely divorced from moral philosophy. It may be divorced from what moral philosophy meant to a typical person in Germany in the 30s or Europe in the late 19th century, but Heidegger is much more forcefully divorcing it from morals here than Plato does, in part to focus on the sort of metaphysical structure aspects of what is being said here. Now that emphasis is useful because you have to pay attention to this, as this is fundamentally a kind of metaphysical structure kind of thought, and Heidegger, to lay that out completely, wants to sort of hive it off from anyone who thinks that it's about Nietzschean values or something like that. But there are complicated interrelations of these things, and one of the reasons he's doing that hiving off is because he doesn't want to get into the complexity of all that. It's not because there's no relation; it's because the relation is not simple; it's complex. But we
it's
can
also this I was going to say playing words. It's not playing words. It's the transition from Aletheia to pseudos.
Yes.
Pseudos. And the relationship between them, there's a negation of negation, and pseudos is not a negation of anything. That was pretty damn interesting. I had to take notes because I wasn't following it very well. So
we'll definitely come back and talk about both the moral aspect, and is he right to completely separate it from it, and then also the aletheia as being an opposite, not of lethe, but of pseudos. We would say the true and the fake, right? Pseudos is kind of like fake in Greek, false in the sense of fake, if that helps. But we'll get to that when we get to part 3. But it's useful for you to raise these things as puzzles because it will help us focus on them as things which should really be covered.
Yeah, I have a number of other questions, but they're written on the margins, and I'll bring them up as I can as
Okay.
it fits the conversation.
Questions are always great. Okay, Nick. Still on mute.
Muted. Okay. Yes, I read it. I actually just finished it this morning again, just in time. It's a pattern with me. I think I like to cram. I think, but it's also helpful because I remember stuff. It's still fresh somewhat, but also I'm also a bit confused at the end usually. So I thought this particular one was also quite. I was impressively. I found it pleasant, and I was impressed by some of the things I got, like the good and the sun in the allegory being kind of symbolic of the sun. I thought that was very good. The idea of the good not being moral, but rather like a good for something. I thought that was also kind of interesting and insightful. There are a number of things here that I think, for me, this particular book is worth a second read to get something deeper and to chew on it. I think it's makes you really think, and I have a better appreciation of Heidegger now in the way he thinks and the way he keeps unhiding stuff, for it. Yeah, thanks.
Okay, yeah, fair. We'll definitely, yeah, fair. Ryan, reading, first impressions, anything like that? Familiarity with past.
Yeah, hi everyone. This is my first meeting, just in case if
Welcome.
people don't know. I'm based in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, so a ways away from
Sorry,
where you guys are.
Do you say Edmonton?
Yeah, Edmonton, Alberta. Yeah.
Got it. I vacation in Banff every September.
Oh, okay, right on. Yeah, I
It's
just
only time I get into your neck of the woods, and a little bit south of your neck of the woods, but
yeah. I just came back from that area last week. Actually, I was on vacation.
Nice.
So, but yeah, I've been following this group for a little while, but I've been self-studying philosophy somewhat seriously for the past 2 years about. Did a bit in university and didn't really do it, and then just kind of got into it as something of interest. But in any case, I've been following this group, but wasn't planning on reading Heidegger myself probably for some time. But then I saw your guys' last video and plan to read the Theaetetus. So that kind of piqued my interest because I've been mostly spending my time on Plato as of late.
okay. Well, we'll definitely get Theaetetus directly next time. Sorry, keep going.
Yeah. So impressions on this, I had a bit of work to do. I had to catch up on the previous reading and the current one, but I'm caught up now. So yeah, given my first exposure to Heidegger, my impression is that as I read it, there's I catch like glimpses of things or things that I feel like I understand, but then if someone came up to me and asked me to explain the depth of his thought or what he means, I don't think I'd be able to do so. So that's kind of the general feeling I have with him, with this being my first exposure to him. With regards to Plato, oh, sorry, go ahead.
That was about what you were going exactly where I was going to ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. With regards to Plato, I read Republic for the first time last year. Same with Theaetetus. So being the first reading is probably more superficial. And I'm currently reading Republic again a second time. I haven't gotten to the cave allegory yet. I'm just finished book 4. So that's where I'm at now.
Okay. Yep. Great. So welcome. Questions always welcome, and even impressions about how difficult or easy Heidegger is to comprehend is also welcome. Okay, Craig.
Yeah, appreciate your comment about the typos. It actually forced me to purchase it because I had to try to figure out were they really typos or was there something there to be dealing with, and I've discovered they really are typos. So, but this is still a good reference to have.
I love lexicons, by the way, because as opposed to on these online translator services, the online translator services, if you don't get a direct hit on the word, they don't tell you anything. And if you do get a direct hit on the word, they tell you as little about it as possible. Whereas in a lexicon, you can like scan down the page alphabetically. You can see all the related words, right? And you can always find the word you're looking for, even if you're like typing one of the Greek O's differently or something. Anyway, I recommend having a lexicon. It's a good thing.
Yeah, no, it's good. The problem I also have is not having a Greek keyboard. It's kind of hard to put the Greek terms in and
Sure.
And know what to do. So that was good. I did do the reading. Struggled through the first section of stuff. He still has that convoluted style that I still struggle with a little bit. When we got to like the last three or four sections, everything opened up. It was an amazing read at that point. The whole discussion on distortion I found absolutely fascinating, and I went a lot of different directions considering what he was trying to deal with there. How much it is true to Plato, I don't know. You know, he makes a comment that this was the Greek mindset, and I found that fascinating. Also had a sense that he was edging onto psychology, but he didn't really want to go there. So there's an interesting aspect of looking at that. So, but yeah, it's been 50 years since I read The Republic, so I don't have a good clean memory of it. I found it to be needing context, and this is what I'm finding, that Heidegger is at least providing a sense of context within where we are in the 20th, 21st century versus where Plato and the Greeks started out. So I'm finding those ties to be absolutely fascinating. But the distortion was the one that really hit me the most.
Okay, yeah, we definitely want to talk about the history stuff here, because there's a lot of sense of history here that Heidegger is bringing in himself. He's not finding there so much in Plato, maybe a little bit of it in Plato, but that he's definitely heavily coloring how he is reading this, and it's definitely worth some focus on it, as well as the pseudo stuff. And as for the Greeks' understanding on this, keeping straight, not only, or keeping sorted, not only where all the different phases and meanings are. Let's put it this way. The first thing you have to figure out is what Heidegger's even saying about the different voices in Greece, right? About Heraclitus and Plato and Aristotle and the average Greek man on the street and the Greek everyday, and, you know, the Greek that you get in Hesiod and Homer or whatever. And are those saying something different at the beginning than at the end, and so on. And then his own commentary on it and what are they getting right and what are they missing, and what counts as the deep thing, and what counts as the falling off, and is the falling off between the Greeks and us, or within the Greeks. And, you know, it's enough to keep straight, not even enough, it's a lot to keep straight, even what Heidegger is trying to say there, let alone whether or not he's accurate in saying it or what he's basing it on. So we definitely want to go through that too, because he's got a whole, there's the history between the Greeks and now, and there's also the history within the Greeks. But okay, good topic to bring up. Joe.
Well, I'm totally an innocent naif when it comes to Plato. I've read about 6 or 7 of the dialogues, but only casually without going deeply into any of them in my life. I've never read The Republic, I regret to say, but I'm delighted at what we're doing now, and I'm getting eager about reading the Timaeus next up, because I just finished the readings.
Clear.
Morning.
Theaetetus, not Timaeus.
Yes. Yeah. Plato, Theaetetus. And
yes,
I
you said Timaeus. That's fine.
I can't pronounce things I can't see, but I hope somebody would put the details of that edition up on the chat so that later I can just get it off of Amazon without needing to write it down now.
Got it. Yeah.
But
so
let me say this.
Sorry, I will definitely do that later. But Pete, if you happen to have a link for it now, I mean, that might be helpful.
Yeah, real quick there. When I looked, there were 2 listings of it on Amazon. One was for $48 and one was for $12. So find the $12 one.
Is that the one that Jason is recommending, the $12 one?
It's the same book. It's the same book. It's just
Including the
first time-
paginations?
First time it came up, it was used for $48, and then you had to scroll down about another page or so to get to the $12 new version of it, which is what we want.
Oh, good. Thank you very, very much for all of that added information.
You buy the $12 version.
Let me contribute briefly, having told you what I haven't known or read, never delved into these things in the Republic. I was delighted to learn in depth about the cave allegory, as Heidegger explicated it well. I think so. And then this follow-up on the hiddenness was delightful. I especially like the distinction that has already been referred to today, which I like to say between truth and fake news on the one hand, and between things that we simply don't know yet because we never actually have discovered them or we forgot them. And I think that's a fascinating whole area there. So I like the way he approached the whole idea of truth through the idea of its inverse. I thought that was very valuable. I've often thought that there are many elements in philosophical discussions that can only be approached through their inverse, like, for example, justice. We don't know what that is, but we know what injustice is, and so forth like that. But back to more previous comments, some modern philosopher, and of course I don't know who, has influenced me so that I don't think of the word good as applying in any way to a noun. It applies as an adjective to describe other things which are judged to be good or are useful or whatever good is going to mean in that situation, context-wise. So that's one thing that I think puzzles, is that they took a perfectly good concept, good, and decided that because we have this thing in our mouth, we have to believe that there's a noun that it refers to, something's unveiled to us, but it's not. Good, that's the one interesting thing we find about good here is we really don't know how to see it. We see it, we know it when we see it, but we don't know it otherwise or abstractly. I think that's an important thing to remember. Some modern philosopher influenced me. I don't know if it's Heidegger in some indirect reading or with Wittgenstein or somebody before him. Jason would know. Finally, I delight in the lexicons. There's a small lexicon in the back of the current volume we're reading. Very limited Greek, but it does help me bring all the things that start with a phi together and the things that start with a theta together so I can begin to pick out. And it reminds me very much of how much I enjoyed wandering through the stacks of Harper Library at the university. Because the book I'm looking for, of course, I've got a number for it, but all the adjacent books in the library, those are fascinating too. And sometimes I selected one of those instead or even with. Whereas if you just, walk up to the desk and say, give me book H, what 5766.6, you're never going to see the adjacent books. So I like the lexicon idea very much. Thank you for recording this.
Yeah, no, great. I don't know particularly which philosopher may have influenced you on the topic, but it's Plato who's mostly responsible for turning the abstract thing into a substantive when you're talking about the idea of the thing itself as opposed to its instances. But that's his general finding the one over the many kind of thing. And in the Republic in book 6, right before we get to this whole discussion place where Heidegger's talking about, he has a rundown on what people normally think about the good. And the basic story is that the common people think that the good is pleasure, and the sophisticated think that it is prudence. But both of them don't know what they're talking about because they're inconsistent, because if you push the people who say the good is pleasure, they will agree that there are bad pleasures. So they need good and bad inside of pleasure. And then for the sophisticated ones, you ask them what it's important to be prudent about, and after a lot of hemming and hawing, they'll get around to it's important to be prudent about the good and the bad. So they give another self-referential definition. So this is proof that both sides of the thesis have things wrong with them and they don't really understand what they're talking about. And after this wonderful overview of what people think about that, so there's other thing. Plato also says, Socrates says, that for things like justice and nobility, people are content to have the reputation for it. But when it comes to something being good, they don't want the reputation for it. They want the thing itself, and they don't care about opinion anymore. because something that if you have something without the good, it's worthless, and it's not enough to have the reputation for good without a good itself. So people already have these things, they know about it, and they have these ideas about it, but their ideas are inconsistent, and they don't really gel, and it's not easy to grasp. And so Glock kind of says, yes, well, that's all very well, but tell me what you think. And that's where he begs off and says, I don't claim to know about these things. I only know that it's hard to know. And by the way, the guardians of our city had better know all about it or we're screwed, right? So that's the sort of immediate context that introduces all this discussion of the idea of the good being beyond being, all that sort of thing, happens after that preliminary discussion of the general opinions about it, which are more in this moral context. That's why I mentioned this thing for Carlos. But Heidegger, doesn't talk about that interest stuff. He just jumps straight to the, if I can put it this way, the interesting metaphysical stuff, right? And then there's another section right after that about the divided line that he also mostly skips. He does briefly allude to it on one page here, which we'll get to, but we'll bring out more about the divided line. But anyway, the point that I'm making there is that the making substantive nouns out of abstract concepts is like Socrates' stock and trade in the dialogues, right? It's the thing he's known for. It's his signature move. And if it's a distortion, it's his distortion. Okay, anyway, Jim.
On that note, would you say then for Plato, the good would be like an animate noun, or it's not a proper noun? How is he referring to it then? You know what I'm saying? Like, since we're talking about how
Doesn't call it animate. He does say it has something to do with soul, certainly, but we'll have to get to the actual structure of the beyond being aspect of good.
Okay. Yeah, that's it's okay. You said that, and I was like, oh, I've been thinking about that anyway, with the way that Joe mentioned it, then you mentioned it, and I was thinking about that kind of thing reading this. So yes, I read it. I have a lot of highlighting. I have stuff that I highlighting questions and things like that. I don't want to go into right now. I like that he mentioned Kierkegaard, even though it wasn't really like, I'm not going down.
Just for a pseudonym, right? He wants pseudos and pseudonyms. That's not on Kierkegaard.
Yeah. To try to make a point about. He still was talking about. Let me look at my note. Unhiddenness. I still. Well, there's. I'll get into the questions. I have. It's all fascinating. It's all makes my brain feel like it's humming, and everything else. And I just have a lot of questions about that the unhidden, and then how he seems to mesh that with concealment and unconcealment. And I don't really know if there's one statement he made, and maybe this is waiting for a question. I'm probably jumping ahead. Overall, it was great. I'm jumping into questions already because you're going a mile in.
I got it. Yeah.
so forgive me. I want to start going there, but I'll wait. You'll probably answer most of them in our discussion. But just to make sure, I don't know if I buy. Towards the end, he makes this statement basically about being is equated to presence, and that therefore it's reduced to not goneness. And I don't know if I'm convinced that he proves that, and that I could put Plato in that category, or the way that Plato would have described it. And I don't know if he's lumping it with just Plato and the way the allegory of the cave is used, or if he's lumping it all with the ancient Greeks. And I thought that was a little weird. In earlier mentioned ambiguity already about being the unhidden being ambiguous. So I'm like, well, I don't think I'm convinced that he can make that statement, and I'm just supposed to go along with it at the end.
So it's fair to say it's a very strong, bold claim he makes, and it's fair to say he has the substance of his argument has been aimed elsewhere, so to speak. So he hasn't given you a long argument as to why he thinks that's the case. It's kind of one of those freighted oracular promissory notes.
There you go again.
Where if I prove this to you, it would completely rethink the way you thought about Plato and the Greeks, wouldn't it? Wait till the end of the book, right? That sort of thing. So, but if you detected that, wait a minute, he hasn't proved that claim, you have detected an accurate statement. He has not yet proved that claim. It's a big claim. It's one of his characteristic claims. One of the ones that Rosen spent a lot of time worrying about, and he hasn't proved it yet. It might be true. If so, he hasn't proved it yet. But we'll talk about what he actually has and hasn't said about it. The one place where he sort of alluded to it was when he was talking about the hidden opposites of truth, and he mentions the not yet and the no longer as ways of something being hidden. And the point is that the fake doesn't occur those ways. The fake or the distorted is only a kind of untruth that occurs in a kind of standing present. Something being hidden because it is not yet unveiled, or something being hidden because it is no longer unveiled, is not a form of hidden that corresponds with fake, as its opposite corresponds with fake. And it's also the past and future moments, if I can put it that way, of hiddenness is bringing out this that something being hidden has this in time temporal actuality character that isn't necessarily there in the idea of the false, right? But the place where they line up with less jar, if you can put it that way, is in the temporal present. So the temporal present, the present before me, and the actual as actually present lining up is what Heidegger is kind of claiming there is the basis on which you can turn this notion of unveiledness, right? If you took the whole thing and it's all of its temporal senses and you tried to turn it, only part of it would make the rotation and the other parts would stick out and worry you, right? But if you restrict it to only the present part, then you can rotate it from veiled, unveiled to true, fake.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of the basis of his claim that that presence is what is enabled. Understanding being as presence is what has enabled this change. That's the only sort of real argumentation he's given us so far. And it's kind of a subtle idea to see it that way.
Yeah.
It to him is meant to be a stronger argument than it may appear because he hasn't stressed all those things. It's meant to be something you're supposed to, wait a minute, is he saying this? Is he saying this? It's like a possible theorem you could try to think through. And he's only giving you those hints so far. But that's, if there's an argument that's already been presented that you can see as kind of a justification for that claim, that would be what it is.
Yeah, well, but that makes sense. He's sort of bootstrapping the whole idea of, a hammer is a hammer because it's used for something. That's one of his the classic, Heidegger thing. But this seems like being is actually being is approachable when you realize an individual can be inauthentic by distorting the truth in a moment with another person in a world, and because of that distortion, they're that's the inauthentic, and you can see it in real time.
I get it. I mean, it doesn't necessarily even have to be inauthentic or authentic inauthentic, because that's about whether or not it's your own or somebody else's. But one thing to keep track of here is does the sense of the untrue as the pseudos or as the fake or as the false require temporal present? That's one thing. Does it require something like a lie? Both of those are important things to track here. And this also may get back a little bit to Carlos's question about, is this completely divorced from the moral? As an understanding of good as the empowerment of being in truth, right? That may seem like a metaphysical idea that is just an empowerment and an efficaciousness and a good for and a bringing about, and doesn't have a moral dimension. But it might also have a moral dimension, especially if it's contrasted with something which is more like a distortion. But we're getting deep into the into the subject matter. It's a fine topics to bring up, and you're right that he has not fully made the case that it was a particular understanding of being as presence in a temporal present sense and a presence around me in the same way we understood it in basic problems phenomenology or something that was ruling in Plato's mind when he, or was it Aristotle, switched the meaning of truth around, right?
Yeah.
If he did, but okay, Dan.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
So I read this book about, I don't know, 6 months ago. I also read I read most of the Platonic dialogues, I think about a year, 2 years ago, including the two that we mentioned. So yeah, and I didn't went back to the I didn't go to the back to the book again now. So I'm kind of a little bit behind you guys in that sense, because it's no longer fresh in my mind. And I'm still keeping, I'm reading Heidegger on my own. Like, for example, now I'm in the middle of the Principle of Reason, and I read a few other books since then. And yeah, that's me.
Okay. Yep. So if you do remember things from this one, or even if you can tie it into some of the other things, always welcome. We got a James K. I know that James Linton goes by Jim. James, do you prefer James or Jim?
James, okay. Yeah, thanks. I haven't read this book, I'm just joining you for the first time, but I've finished reading in a meeting discussing Heidegger's Being and Time. And I think Nick was there. He'll attest to that. I've
Okay.
read Introduction to Metaphysics, and I read recently Iris Murdoch's chapter from her book on the idea of the good, and compare it to modern existentialism and romanticism. She blames Kant for having separated us from the what is it? From the thought that it's kind of metaphysical thinking, because that's what Kant did, and he kind of like he was responsible for leading us into this kind of ultra individualism where we're isolated from everything else, and that the idea of the good, is no longer of interest. And so my question is, would the good be for Heidegger something metaphysical? I mean,
Well, from the reading, right, he is presenting the idea of the good in Plato as being primarily about something which is a enabling or empowering of both being and truth. So it has a kind of metaphysical structure role first and foremost. He even goes so far as to claim that these are really the only two places where Plato talks about the good as it actually is, even if there's other places where he talks about the good in sort of common senses. I think that's a little bit of a stretch, a little bit of a push, whatever, but I can understand why he's saying it. He thinks that there's a structural role that the idea of the good plays in Plato, and that the core of its meaning for him comes from that role in the structure, and that role in the structure is a beyond being that is enabling of both being and truth, which is similar, if we've been reading other Heidegger, to a role that we saw him ascribe to his own understanding of time, bizarrely enough. We saw that at the end of Basic Problems of Phenomenology, but the Heidegger is definitely presenting its kind of metaphysical role, but also specifically its role in understanding truth, the phenomena of truth, as being the main thought about good in Plato, the main source of his thought about good. Why he thinks the things about good that he thinks, Heidegger says, comes primarily from this role that it has for him, and not from the later sort of moralistic understandings of good that he sees as being kind of overlays that sort of left that behind, didn't understand it. There's definitely some evidence for this reading on Heidegger's part in the sort of lore known about Plato and Plato's life. Plato famously once gave a public lecture on the idea of the good, and everyone showed up expecting a lecture on moral philosophy, and they heard lots of things about the one and measure and truth, and went away confused. That's at least what the story is told about it. So anyway, that I don't know if that helps.
Yeah, so another question is, if I may, where is Heidegger, defined as the good in Being and Time, relate to his idea of Dasein, the idea of truth and good in his in terms of Dasein? Is that authenticity or?
It's not authenticity, he doesn't give a definition or explanation of good in Being in Time. Various people have tried to read various versions of a morality, Platonic or otherwise, into aspects of it, or at least the psychology, but he himself doesn't directly talk about the good or even the ought in Being in Time. He talks about all kinds of things which are more or less authentic, and but more or less authentic just means more or less actually your own. It doesn't mean good in the Platonic sense, or even in a moralistic sense that you get in like a Nietzsche. Is there a notion of good or proper directing conduct in Heidegger? Absolutely, and we'll even see some of it in our discussion of this. But it has much more to do with something like history and man's essence, what man is actually capable of, something like that, and the history of being. Are you a participant in the history of being or not? Something like that, which is a question of rank or weight more than it is a question of morals for Heidegger. I don't know if that helps. In terms of the Dasein idea, there definitely are parallels here. The Dasein is a sometimes subjective pole, but it's also like a betweenness between a subjective and an objective pole, which is close to the structure that we're talking about here as one thing that yokes together the thought and the thing thought. So this almost subjective sense of a betweenness idea that you get in the yoke being discussed in this section and the Dasein idea are definitely fairly close. So you could read that multiple ways in which Heidegger is informed about his reading of Plato by his own philosophical ideas, and also ways in which his own philosophical ideas are less far from Plato than people might originally suppose. People usually think of him as a existentialist heavily indebted to Nietzsche in various ways, and that's certainly true to an extent, but there are aspects of this betweenness idea that are, I don't want to say they're a replacement for the doctrine of the ideas, but they have a similar role in a metaphysical structure, something like that.
So can we understand Heidegger as being more than an existentialist thinker, but maybe going beyond that to being a speculative thinker?
I think there's no question that he is. So especially some of the later Heidegger is a kind of speculative metaphysician. He's not a metaphysician in the systematic sense of laying down a system, but in a questioning sense, he certainly is. He's always laying these things out as questions and themes for inquiry rather than as answers. But with that proviso, much of the ground he's going over is recognizably speculative metaphysics ground from the standpoint of the whole Western tradition, back to Hegel or Plato or Aristotle, etc., Kant as well. He likes to think of himself as being more rigorous than some of the willier thinkers in that tradition. I think that in some places that's fair. He also can get obscure and poetic himself at times. Thinking especially of some of his writings from the 30s. But I don't know if that helps. Certainly, he's not simply a, if I can put it this way, an unproblematic existentialist of the kind of a Camus or even of a Kierkegaard. Does that help?
Yeah, sure does. Thanks a lot.
Great. Okay. Lena, welcome. And did you do the reading, first impressions, prior familiarity, any of that stuff? Lena finding the mute button. Okay, maybe you just want to lurk. That's fine. Jake, do you want to jump in instead?
Oh, I'm so sorry. I think I was muted.
Okay. Go ahead, Lena.
Hi, I'm new. Today is my first day. I have learned about allegory of the cave from philosophy class a few years, like in college back. I started to read a little bit of the Herberger's ideas on Plato and his philosophy about truth. So the impression I've gotten from reading it, the truth could be absolute or relative, and absolute truth is probably hidden from us, according to Plato, but it's accessible through universal knowledge which we get, or which could be actually quoted as morale, which we have. So I don't know where is he going to get with it in the end, but Plato meant truth of some type of universal truth, which is higher good, maybe outside of the time realm, which exists independently, and humans have ability to get to that universal truth. Relative truths which change with time, which are, which we live in, or prior truth. The question is truth universal to all humanity, to all religions and races, or is it still relative? It sounds like there is still absolute truth out there and we all can relate to. So that's kind of questions it brings up for me.
Yeah, these are fair questions. I mean, one of the themes of the Theaetetus will be this ancient relativism question that Socrates in the dialogue is arguing against. The representative of it in the Theaetetus, which is what we're going to be reading next, is the later part of this book is Heidegger's reading of the Theaetetus, which is kind of a book on knowledge, or a dialogue on knowledge. Anyway, one of the themes is Protagoras. Protagoras is the Greek who's sort of the Greek version of relativism. He's famous for the saying that man is the measure of all things, of things are that they are, and of things that are not that they are not. And that sort of that was sort of the classic of a kind of sophist version of relativism of truth among the Greeks. And Theaetetus is the dialogue is concerned to explore that notion, try to steel man it as much as he can, but then also doesn't agree with it in the end. So some of these issues of objective versus subjective truth and knowability or unknowability of truth, the fundamental question in Theaetetus is what is knowledge? So all that stuff definitely comes up, and we'll definitely get into that as we read the Theaetetus itself. There definitely are some connections here, but certainly in the cave allegory, we're being presented with the natural situation of man as being something like deprived of truth to the point of being locked out of it, but discoverable in the sense that it takes a fundamental reorientation of the human being to even know that it's there, something like that. And that it's not something that mankind normally or voluntarily seeks. It's something that is pursued rarely and that is hard, something like that. And the whole allegory of the cave stuff we got last time was about that sort of reorientation. And the stuff we're on now is what has to be true about the truth in any maximal sense for that situation, the situation described in the allegory of the cave, to be the proper understanding of man's situation. There has to be something about an accessibility of an ultimate truth, but also something about how it is not readily apparent, not easily accessible. Anyway, so that's just tying in the themes you're concerned about with the subject matter of our next couple of sessions and last couple of sessions, if that helps.
Okay, thank you. It's Herberger. Is he with Plato on it, or he is opposing him?
Sorry, which one are you talking about?
The writings which the readings.
Oh,
which we-
Heidegger. Well, I mean,
Heidegger.
it's fair. He's mostly explicating. He's mostly explaining what he thinks Plato thinks about these things. But then he also is going to claim by our third section that there's something that has gone wrong or been lost or been missed in the way that Plato understood or explained these things. So he's not simply a Platonist. He's not simply a Plato fan. He's trying to explain what Plato thought about these things, but also what he thinks was missed or left. He's exploring another path. He'll tell us first that he just wants us to go over the same ground that Plato went over and to understand this stretch of road, to go over it ourselves. But the reason he wants to do that is because he thinks you cannot make progress on these questions yourself if you haven't gone over that ground that Plato had first gone over. So he is explicating and recapitulating Plato in his own terms, but in part with an ultimately critical or an ultimately revising intent, if that makes sense.
Sure. Thank you. That's interesting.
Yep. Good questions. All right, and welcome. Jake.
Hey, sorry about the camera situation. My laptop is just that old.
No problem. all video is optional.
Yeah, well, I try to be personable when I can. So anyway, yeah, finished the reading and enjoyed it as I always do, encountering this guy. It has been a lifetime since I've sat at any length with any of the Plato. But based on I think based on Heidegger's method, I'm okay with that. I mean, I think it's interesting. He's got he actually talks about. He talks at some length about what edition. We were just talking about what edition of the Theaetetus to get a hold of, and he actually has the same moment right in the lecture, and talks at some length about the fact that. These are not philological questions that he's, trying to raise. And I really liked the piece right at the beginning, right at the top of page 96, where he says, why did we undertake this study of the allegory of the cave? And he says, to make a testimony to Aletheia come alive for us. And I think that's, what attracted, the reason I came back to Heidegger after 30 years was in looking for an alternative to the kind of scientistic, flattened out, mathematical approach to people that I was running into in the world of, psychology. And so, in a lot of ways, his method is what's most attractive to me in the sense that, he looks at, truth as an awakening, truth as an enkindling, that he's trying to wake something up in us rather than trying to say 2 + 2 = 4. And in the realm of people, that to me seems, terribly important. What's interesting, my relationship to Heidegger is also a little bit conflicted because the, when his more kind of gritty discontent with modern life starts to show up in its most aggressive ways, I really appreciate the fact that he's like, you can't turn everything into math. Not everything can be turned on, put onto a graph. Truth is not a simple correspondence. But there's I think what you could call almost a dark side of situatedness, which for me starts to show up on page 99 in the second full paragraph, where he just goes on, and it's interesting. I mean,
sorry. Before it's interesting,
Yeah,
what does he go
please.
on? I'm sorry. What are you talking about? Are you talking about his the things about the 19th century he doesn't like, or things that the modern age he doesn't like, or is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, no. So, things like his trip on the tram, right? And he's saying, look, the reason we can all ride a trip on the tram is that, people like Plato and people prior to Plato actually started inquiring into the nature of being and reflecting on ourselves. And then he starts whittling that down to science, right? So that's again, a reason I'm thinking about that, but he's obviously very ambivalent about his trip on the tram, because he says, whether like this, namely that we travel or even must travel by electric tram signifies a success, or is rather the opposite, cannot be decided without further ado. So, I mean, you know, there are just all these great moments where he just shits on modern life, right? Where he's just kind of like, you know, if you listen to the chattering, or there's even, this is a great footnote. I hope you all don't mind me putting.
Sorry, Jake, you're going a mile a minute and too far afield. You gotta.
All right.
We don't need you to quote the text to us. The comment you're trying to make is about the ways in which he finds things unsettling or that he doesn't like about modern life. And I've heard that, but I'm still trying to get your comment on it. What's your comment on those aspects of Heidegger? They're obviously there. Yeah, we can see them. What are you making of them?
Yeah, I think it's for me, there's an ambivalent relationship to that, because I think that some of his you know, elitism and, you know, manifest, you know, kind of anti-populism has some real dark shades to it. And while I appreciate something like saying, you know, whoever thinks in this way imagines that the essence and spirit of man is something one gets at the pharmacist, which I just love that shit, right? Because it's just so biting. At the same time, you know, I think it brings into question, you know, whether he's...
Jake, you're dancing around it. You got to get to the point. You have to tell us what you think.
All right,
about
dude, I'm
this.
good. I'm good, man. Carry on.
Okay. Are you trying to say that when he goes off the modern world like that, you find it biting and witty, but you're not sure if it's just or something like that? Is that what you're trying to say?
Yeah.
Or do you think it might be dangerous, or
I think it's wild. Yeah, I think it's fucking wildly dangerous. Obviously, the
okay. Now, okay. I was trying to get you. You were dancing around the point without making it, but it's okay. I understand. Sure. There's plenty of places in Heidegger where he has strong arguments which are just not strong arguments, strong rhetoric, which are just his opinions. And one of the things you have to ask is, where are they just about sort of annoyances of his life, and where are they actually about the sort of philosophical content and ideas that he's that we're discussing here? In terms of elitism, I think that's definitely fair. There's definitely, especially this sort of intellectual, those participating in the conversation of philosophy are doing something of transcendent human importance, which is more important than other things. And that's sort of his own take and his own understanding of his life, or whatever it is he thinks he's trying to do. One of the questions you have to ask there is that something that he thinks is recapitulating ground that Plato is also going over, or is it improving on Plato? Anyway, that's something else to consider there. But Joe, you had a comment or thought? Sorry, Joe, you're still on mute.
I always have to find the unmute button. It never works for me quite well. Yeah, I was actually, just to reinforce what you just said, one part of the previous readings that I sort of chuckled at was when he talked about when the one who has gone up out of the cave into the light, been exposed to it, figured out what's going on there, and gone back down to the cave to tell everybody else, how the others fight him and reject him and so forth. And I thought to myself, Heidegger must feel a little bit rejected by his insights and wisdoms.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, that's just a chuckle.
Yes, it's fair. Okay, we talked about all the textual criticism stuff. We got everybody's first source things. I just wanted to one comical. I don't know if it's comical or not. I made a list of all the words that are misspelled with the G. Right, all the cases are it's where it should have had a G and it got an L instead. And it's probably just an index of the subject matter that we're thinking about. But good, knowledge, yoke, and reason all get misspelled by just turning a G into an L. That's agathon, gnostics, zygon, and logos. That's quite a set of words to misspell in a Greek philosophical text. One other thing, just lexicographical thought. We're going to get to Noen in a second, but lexicographical thought. How much should you make about the fact that aletheia starts with an a privative? And this is a point you can find if you go into any of Craig's lexicons, if you have one. I don't know if it's Craig's lexicon, but you'll find roughly a sixth of all Greek words in an ancient lexicon start with a. It's not like 1/26. There's lots of a this and a that and apo this and apo that and ana this and ana that and this and that. It's a very common prefix. So the result is you get a huge portion of the philosophical, especially lexicon, will have words like that. It doesn't mean they're all, the A's are not all a privatives like aletheia is. Even the A at the start of agathon is not a privative. Okay, the next, we're going to get to the explications now. We're going to move on to talking about section 2 and section 3. I want to divide this into first talking about section 2, then talking about section 3. Oh, you're showing what portion of it are A's? Yes, very good. Even more than
that's just volume 1.
Okay, but how many volumes do you have?
2.
Okay, so
volume.
yeah, so close to a sixth. Yeah, it's a large number. Yeah, you get a third of the way through the first half of the dictionary before you get to B. Okay, I want to talk about perception, because one of the key things going on in this section 2 is he's going to be laying out the idea of the good structure, and the idea of the good structure is all set up by explaining an analogy between the sun and the idea of the good, and the sun is the reigning principle or king in the realm of the perceptibles, and the idea of the good is the reigning principle in the realm of the intelligibles. And the problem is that those two realms, the realm of the sensibles, which is aesthesis, the same word as aesthetics, right, and the realm of the thinkables or the intelligibles, the known, are both referred to here by Heidegger over and over again as perception. He talks about non-sensual perception and mental perception. And there is some warrant for this in Greek, because known can mean intellectual perception. It means something like noticing, to observe, notice, or pay attention to. And in Theaetetus, we're going to get a whole, because one of the starting theses is that knowledge is perception, we're going to get a whole explanation of how it is that the mind is necessary for perception to occur, right? You can't perceive with just the eye without a mind with it, something like that. But it's still not what you would get straight in Plato to translate known all over and over again as perception, when it means mind, thought, intelligence, intelligible, right? And when Plato is making a big divided line difference between the two halves of this of his giant correspondence, the two halves of his triangle, the top half of it is the things which you can see, and the bottom half is the things that you can understand, and those are meant to be distinct. It doesn't help if you start by translating those two words as perception in both cases. You're kind of collapsing the distinction between the two realms that Plato was separating with a divided line. So the point to pay attention to here is known is not aesthesis. Known, yes, can mean mental perception, but it primarily means thought, thinkable, mind, the thought-like. And aesthesis, aesthetics, means perception by the senses, yes. The note that you get, if the note in known for perception is something like noticing, the note in aesthesis is something like feeling, what you can feel, right? So, but sight is still the preeminent sense in both cases, but mental sight is not physical sight. And there are a few places where Heidegger is careful about this, where he does, allow that, known and aesthesis are different. But he continually uses perception to translate known as well as aesthesis. It's like the whole realm in which all of this is being discussed is the realm of perception. And I just need to point out to you that that is something Heidegger is bringing here. He may be bringing it here partly because he's a phenomenologist. He may bring this partly because he's post-Husserl or post-Nietzsche or something like that. But the idea that all of this is to Plato just about perception is false. He's not Platonist enough to tell you that when Plato is talking about perception, he means primarily sensual perception, not mental perception. And when Plato is talking about the thinkable, he's talking about things you cannot see with your eyes. The truth about triangles cannot be seen with your eyes. It's in theorems. The truth about triangles that you can see with your eyes isn't the actual geometric truth about triangles. To any Platonist, the whole realm of the intelligibles is a realm of some kind of strict truth that you cannot perceive with the senses. And the whole realm of what you can perceive with the senses, the whole sensible realm, is less than perfect in its intelligibility, right? That's the basis of the divided line distinction that comes at the very end of book 6, right after the part he's talking about here, and right before the part on the allegory of the cave. So just fundamental point here. You can read Heidegger here, and he's very good on explaining to you what the idea of the good is doing in the structure. But if you see him saying perception everywhere, ask over and over again, which perception is he talking about? Is he talking about noetic perception, or is he talking about sensual perception? If he's talking about noetic perception, mentally substitute thought, mind, right? Intelligibility. Now, we have a tendency to think of thought and mind as being something that happens only inside of our heads, right? We got that from Aristotle, who decided that truth only happened in brains or only happened in language, right? And that's not true in Plato. But the intelligibles being distinct from the sensibles is, if Plato has a doctrine, that's his core doctrine. If the allegory of the cave means anything, it's distinguishing between the immediately apparent and the true. You don't get to distinguish between the true world and the apparent world and claim that that whatever is apparent is the true, right? The whole point of the allegory of the cave is to make a sharp, cleaving distinction between what is apparent to the senses and what is actually true, right? And what is actually true is the realm of the thinkables. If you call them both perceptions, you're going to miss this distinction. And I find Heidegger almost willfully saying perceiving, perceiving, perceiving everywhere, but he says perceiving with the senses and non-sensory seeing, right? Now, his partial warrant for this is that Plato is in the process of using an analogy, right? He's going to analogize between the realm of perceptibles by sense, the realm ruled by the sun, and the realm of the intelligibles. But you need to know that when he's talking about the intelligibles, he's not talking about the world of sense. Right, a bunch of hands held up. Ryan, Pete, and Nick. I don't know which order you were in. Ryan, you want to jump in first?
Yeah, sure, I'll go first. So just with the points you made there, I guess the big question for me is this kind of a tool of rhetoric from Heidegger in terms of focusing on perception, or does he actually have a problem of not understanding Plato as Plato understood himself, say, if that makes sense?
It does. I think it's not just rhetoric. I think partly he's trying to be explanatory, and he's trying to keep to the analogy between them. I think he is also trying to understand Plato better than Plato understood himself, if that makes sense.
Right. I guess is that something that's possible?
People differ on the point, but I want to hear the other people's comments first. Pete?
Right. So I think there's a distinction that Heidegger has in mind that's different from the divided line in Plato, and specifically with perception. If I'm walking down the path with you and there's a corner, we go around the corner, and I can perceive, we both perceive there's a flower in front of us in the sense of physis. We weren't seeing it, now we see it, now we're aware of the flower. But we could also be walking down the path and I tell you there's a flower around the corner, and you're perceiving it through language, not through the senses.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's the noetic perception that Heidegger's after, which is different from me understanding intellectually that when I look at the moon, I'm looking at a circle, and the moon is an instance of the form circle, which is what's going on in Plato, I think.
I'm going to only partly agree with you. So I don't think that the noetic is the heard through language. There is some tendency in Aristotle in particular to conflate the noetic with the what can be made rigorous in logic version of language, right? Where you have the notion of language being the way that it's conveyed, but you also have the notion of a sort of logical rigor being applied to it. And there's some of that, but much less of it in Plato. But for Plato, I think all those things are just questions about how you know it. The thing known is the mental object, and his paradigm is not perception of the flower in the street. His paradigm is the truths of mathematics. It's geometry. And he makes that clear even in the section about the divided line. It's why he uses the metaphor of a divided line with a proportion as the way in which to explain these things. He's appealing to the way that mathematical truth is understood. Is the way that mathematical truth is understood simply linguistic? No, not simply. Plato also doesn't think that the image or the language are the actual proper tools for conveying the actual sort of dialectical full truth about something. And he's very explicit about this. All of those tools are distortions, and all those tools have their problems. And he claims that you have to go through all of them repeatedly. You have to know the name and the definition and the image and the idea. And all of those things are still not the thing, but you have to ring through all four of them repeatedly for the mental notion of the mental thing itself to actually arise for you. That's the sort of full Platonic understanding of these things, but it's definitely not relying on just the language. I think that Heidegger, in part, in part from his phenomenology training, has an understanding of where ideas come from, or what ideas are, that is much more directly related to the perceptibles, that is much more directly related to the actual as what can give rise to the perceptions. In part, that's because he's trying to be a phenomenologist, trying to be grounded, part because he's trained by Husserl, and his notion of ideas is at least partially Husserl's notion of ideas instead of Plato's notion of ideas. But Plato is a very mathematical metaphysician on the point. He's not trying to anchor these things back into a piece of phenomenal evidence. He's jumping forward to his mental thought of the actual mental machinery, thought-like machinery behind the world that makes the world be what it is, of which the world is merely an appearance to him, right? And that's much closer to the way a particularly mathematically inclined mathematical physicist thinks about reality than it is the way Husserl thinks about it. It's not based upon evidence. It's viewing the evidence as itself just being explained by some underlying mathematical thing. And that turning around, that orientation away from the senses and toward the mathematically true, is the turning around in the cave for Plato, right? That reorientation onto the true world as opposed to the apparent world, that is a turning away from the apparentness of the apparent world, is the reorientation that he's talking about of leaving the cave. And it is the basis of the divided line. So I think that Heidegger understands that when he's laying out the two realms, when he's trying to bring out the similarities in the two realms, he has a strong tendency to fall back on his perceptual understanding of what an idea is in the first place that you would get from phenomenology or Husserl. Nick?
Yes, I actually was trying to read parts of it again because I guess on my reading, the conflation of aesthesis and Neuen didn't jump out as me as conflation into just pure perception. I mean, I see terms like sensory perception
Yes.
versus non-sensory seeing, it just didn't jump out to me. So I was going to ask you if you could point us out to something.
You're absolutely right that when he says non-sensory seeing, he's being explicit about the distinction. When he says oran as the realm of the visible, right? He's being explicit. He'll give you the two words, but he will still also just say perception, perception, perception in the parts which aren't translations from the Greek over and over again without the qualifications, right?
Yeah,
I put it to
do
you.
see some of those.
I put it to you that non-sensory seeing is a round square. Okay, he's talking about thinking. So the question you have to ask yourself is, why won't he use the word thinking? Plato is talking about thinking and the intelligibles. He's harking back to his teacher Parmenides saying that thinking and being are the same, right? And for Plato, nous is mind, is thought, and the noumenon is the thing thought. And he's trying to talk about the realm of thought. And the realm of thought is not the realm of sense. So
okay,
when you call both those things perception, there is something like mind involved even in sensual perception. And that's going to be brought out in the Theaetetus. And I think that's partly foreshadowing, that is partly why Heidegger is making this stress, so that when we get to Theaetetus's thesis that knowledge is perception, it won't seem to be coming completely out of left field. But when Theaetetus says knowledge is perception, he's not thinking of mind. He's thinking of eyes, right? And he needs to be disabused of the notion that the eyes see. Dead eyes don't see. No mind behind them, no sight, right? And that structure is what Plato is appealing to here. But anyway, the other thing that's noticeable here is just that the divided line is missing, right? This is a whole discussion of everything about the idea of the good and everything about the four-stage occurrence of truth, and there's no divided line in it, right? But right between them in the actual Republic, there's a whole discussion of the divided line.
Okay. No, I get that there is no emphasis on that dividing line. There is no.
It's not just
clear
emphasis.
demarcation.
It's not there at all.
It just didn't jump out at me the way you did. But I'm glad you pointed that out, because that's something to think about and pay attention to.
So I think that Heidegger's two triangles are a very good exposition of the correspondence between the idea of the good and the idea of the sun in the two realms in Plato. I think he's entirely fair and entirely accurate to his source. I'm not trying to accuse him of any kind of distortion. But the part that he left out is that the realm of the forms and the realms of the intellectual was one half of the thinkables, and the other half is the mathematical objects, right? The lower half of the intelligibles is the mathematical objects, and the higher half are those which can be reached only by dialectic and are known without a hypothesis and without an image. Whereas the mathematical things require an image borrowed from the realm of the perceptibles. And in the realm of the perceptibles, the things themselves, which are not known but are taken on trust, are the major division, and the smaller division is the images or imaginations that are just copies of the actual things. So images, lowest level, the things themselves which are taken on trust, that's the realm of opinion. The entire realm of opinion and the realm that cannot be truly known and the sphere within the heavens are equated in Plato. The material world is unknowable in itself, is unintelligible in itself to Plato. It's the realm of what you can feel, but you cannot know it fully. And that's another reason why I think this Platonic point is one that is inimical to Heidegger. There's a downplaying of the actual and a downplaying of what is in time in Plato's division between the intelligible and the sensible that Heidegger is not on board with. It's not part of his own understanding. His own understanding is going to be bringing out the actuality of truth and the in-timeness of thought, right? In a way that Plato is diametrically opposite to. right? And if there's a turning, there's maybe a turning in the notion of untruth in Plato, that's fair, but there's also a turning here in the sense of perception in Plato by Heidegger, where he's turning it to hide how different Plato is from him on this notion of how time affects truth. Because to Plato, time makes truth only in the realm of the feelable and never in the realm of the thinkable. Anything affected by the category of time is not simply intelligible to Plato.
Right, because time is, well, it's transient and so forth, and
yes, and because the things which are affected by the category of time are changing.
Yeah, timeless, and okay. Yeah,
when Theaetetus is brought home from Megara at the beginning of this book, he is dying of something. He is dying of the flux. He is killed by motion.
Okay.
There's all kinds of things like this which are thematic in Plato, and Heidegger is,
right.
I won't say suppressing them, but he's not bringing them out because they're not the parts of Plato that he agrees with.
So that's a good point. I mean, that's a good thing that you're able to help us with, is to kind of distinguish between Plato's thinking and his world, and the way that Heidegger talks about it in a maybe in a hidden, distorted way, in a pseudo way, it sounds like. Excuse me. Okay.
It may only be a forgotten way, or it may be a distorted way. Jim.
Well, I think this seems to answer my quandary in the beginning of, I'm not convinced with Heidegger's view of perception. You know what we talked about earlier. So Plato just kicked the crap out of him. Or you put on Plato's boxing team.
I don't think, I think all I've done is draw the distinction between them. I don't know that one of them hasn't kicked the crap of the other one, but they're not the same person. Okay, they're not agreeing with one another. And I can bring out the fact that these two philosophers do not simply agree with one another. Their understanding of the thinkable is different, and they're especially the relationship between their understanding of thought and time is different.
Yeah. I always looked at how you segued into this by referring to it as a distortion, which I thought was a nice pun, considering the segment prior to that. That's all.
Okay.
It's great. It's great. It's riveting.
Okay. So let's talk about that first section though. Are the two triangles clear to everyone? Do they understand why we have those two triangles, what the two triangles represent? Did anyone not understand some piece of the two triangles? I think there's at least one thing in the two triangles that you might translate slightly differently, but I'm talking about this diagram on page 85. With all these Greek labels.
Yeah, is that the first or the second one?
I'm talking about the one on page 85.
Yeah, I have a different edition. Is that the first triangle or the second triangle?
I'm saying both of them are on the same page.
Okay.
The correspondence between the two of them, the first and the second. So the first one has Helios at the top, that's the sun. It has Phos, light, right underneath it as the yoke that is connecting Horon and Horomon. So the one on the right is the seeable, basically, and the one on the left is sight. Seeable and sight are yoked together by light, and the sun is the source of the light, the sight, and the seeable is the claim. In the actual Republic, you get that the sun is the king of the realm of the intelligibles, and he even makes a pun about the realm of the perceptibles, and he even makes a pun on the word for seeable, the word for within the horizon, and the word for the heavens being exactly the same in Greek, oranos. The oranos, which is the outer sphere of the heavens, and also where we get our word Uranus, right? That word, is etymologically, and this is discussed in the Credulous, is etymologically similar to the horizon of what can be seen, right? So we think of the what do we mean by the outermost sphere? What do we mean by the sphere of the heaven? We mean that which can be seen, right? So this first triangle is meant to be the metaphysical diagram of the realm of what can be seen, right? You've got sight looking at seeables yoked together by light. Now, we would have to, instead of putting Helios at the top of that, we would probably have to put some original singularity or something like that at the top of that, but whatever. There's some origin of the power and existence of the visible whole, right? That is the source of the light that yokes together the thing seen and the seeing of it, right? And that whole structure is the intelligible structure of the visible universe for Plato. And his corresponding diagram for the realm of the intelligibles is that you have noen, thought, on the left, nomenon, the thing thought in the sense of the thing thought, on the right, agathon in the position of the sun, that is the idea of the good in the position of the sun, and then in Heidegger's label, idea as the thing yoking them together. Now that could be idea or that could be truth. In actual Republic, it's more like he's more inclined to say the truth. But the truth yokes together the thought and the thing thought, the thinking and the thing thought. It's quite unclear here why or how the idea of the good would be the structure that generates those three things. Ryan, was there a question?
Yeah, just something that popped in my head while I was going through this triangle. I think I kind of got the gist of what you were saying, or when I read through it. But so the yoke you have, just the Platonic idea, right? And the good is kind of, I guess, outside and above that, but yet at the same time is a Platonic idea, right? So I'm just kind of to
yes.
How can it be above and outside?
It is even the ultimate idea, the end idea, the outermost idea, the idea that has the character of end, the teleological idea. And Heidegger brings that out accurately, I think. Sorry, trying to get the place where he quotes that. This is on the top of page 78. So the full translation is a bit wordy compared to the original Greek, but in the region of that which is genuinely and truly noble, what is ultimately seen is this idea of the good, but it can be seen only with great difficulty under great exertion. Now, your first clue that that's not a completely literal translation is that it's 3 lines long and the Greek is 1 line long.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. The Greek is ento noston, that's the knowable, noston. So we're talking about, there isn't no in there, that's knowing in the sense of the Gnostics, right? And then teletai, that's the end, the ultimate end, limit knowledge is the,
Did you
the
say?
idea.
Did you say teletai? To tell us just
The teletia. Teletia means
Okay.
end. That's the
Yeah.
same word as telos, means the end or ultimate, the last end or ultimate, the goal, perfection, fulfillment of knowledge is the idea of the good. But in the last word on the line is to see. It's the same oristhai as you have for the realm of the visibles, and mogis, very hard, right? So the ultimate knowledge, the last knowledge, is the idea of the good seen only with great difficulty, right? So it is called an idea. That's where you're to Ryan's question. It's the idea of the good. It's not the good, or not simply the good, but the idea of the good is an idea, and it is seen, but it is seen with great difficulty, and it is the last knowledge. Carlos?
You said that on the bottom triangle, I don't know, remember if you said you could substitute truth for idea, or is it an equivalent?
Right. So in the Republic itself, at that point, Socrates does not use the word idea to describe that yoke. He says truth. So it is Heidegger's gloss that the idea is doing this yoking together, and I think it's a fair gloss. That is what the role of the ideas has in Platonism or in Socrates' Platonism. The ideas are what yoke together the thought and the thing thought, but what Plato actually says in the Republic there is truth. So Plato thinks that whole structure is explaining what ideas are and explaining how ideas work. That the ideas are not simply one role in that triangle, but the whole structure of the triangle and how the triangle works, so to speak. But the thing which yokes together the thought and the thing thought is truth. So what makes the true things true and what makes the being things beings? What is the empowerment of both truth and being? The idea of the good in the realm of the intelligibles. That's the doctrinal metaphysical statement that you get in that part of the Republic. And just he has explained on the analogy of the visibles that the sun is not just a visible thing in the sky, it is also the origin of the visible things, their arising, appearing, so to speak, and their and the eye that can see them, both owe their material existence, we would say, to the sun, to something like the principle of power or energy in the sun, something like that, the material reality of the sun, which is Apollo, by the way. That's the king of the perceptibles, right? But the king of the intelligibles is the idea of the good, and it is the source of truth and being in the realm of the intelligibles. Pete?
Yeah. So, and I think, so this is so Heidegger would say, well, they're both wrong. Plato's wrong. And the analogy why they're wrong works in that if we go out and we look at the night sky, we could say, yeah, the planets and the moon are illuminated by Helios, but we know that the stars actually provide their own source of light. And so we know that there isn't one single agathon that decides that the ideas are correct. There is actually multiple sources. There's no one immortal agathon like Plato thought. There's different sources of truth at different historic epochs and contexts and stuff.
Possibly, but this is not Plato, nor is it even Heidegger. Because Heidegger won't use this scheme, right? Heidegger will have one scheme without two realms in which something like truth appearing is an event that yokes together being and Dasein, right? In the yoke of the open or something like that. And the closest thing he will have to the idea of the good as the origin point of that will be something like the chaos or chasm, or the fissure of in the chaos and chasm that divides being and Dasein, something like that. So to the extent that he has a metaphysical scheme like this, he doesn't put an idea of the good there, but he does have a term for what's there. He doesn't simply say that there's a bunch of things there. He does not simply say that there are a multitude of them in some relativistic sense. Not for the highest level or the lowest level, most underlying level of aletheia, at least.
Yeah, Heidegger's understanding of being is not going to be a triangle.
Well, I'm saying it's not going. It's also not going to be a constellation of many stars all shining with their own light in some Pythagorean sense. Fair. Okay. Nick. I'm sorry. You had more comment?
No, that's good. I'm good.
Okay, Nick.
I just had a question because the term highest good is something we usually read about, but in this text, it's not used. I mean, it just says the good.
Correct.
And there's the highest ideal. So the good that's
Correct.
here is that is the highest good, is it not?
There's no highest being applied to it. The only highest that's involved is highest idea, not highest good. Right? The highest involved is it's not just highest, it's the
Highest idea.
the ultimate or last knowledge. So it's the last, it's the actual term that the Greek end word applies to is knowing. The last knowing is of the idea of the good.
And
The
well,
ultimate knowing.
what does that mean, the last knowing? There is only one good in this sense, then. It's unique. There's
Yes, it's an
like
idea.
the sun. There's
In all of Plato, anything which is an idea is a one over a many that is sort of the unifying concept of all of its instances. That's just what idea means in Plato.
okay.
So in that sense, there is one good, but the understanding of the idea of the good is the last knowledge. It's the highest knowledge, and it's the hardest to see, the last thing seen. That's the doctrinal Plato. Ryan?
Right.
This might be too much of a tangent and maybe can't be gotten into, but the question I have is, does modern cosmology or physics, like you said, we could consider the replacing the sun with, say, the Big Bang or
Sure.
origin of the universe, but that's still not eternal or being. It's becoming in flux itself. So does that render?
So I
does that cause a big?
I don't think it causes a big problem. I mean, I think that a modern Platonist would simply say that we have updated our idea of a king of the realm of the perceptibles that was a single sun that was also the god Apollo with an original singularity or something like that. But we're still talking about the same idea of there being, not same idea, the same conceptual scheme of there being an origin for the or support for the energy, activity, and life of the material universe, something like that. That's the idea there. We're not going to use exactly the same scheme because we don't have exactly the same physics, obviously. But and their physics was, mystical rather than even physical, if you put it that way. But the idea that there is something which powers the entire realm of the perceptibles in time is not a completely foreign concept to modern cosmology, but they would think of it differently. I don't think those things take us very far, except to realize that these metaphysical schemes are big enough that you can fit lots of things into them, right? They're not the kind of thing that you do an experiment to falsify, because they're flexible and abstract enough that you can fit, very different animals into them, if I could put it that way. So that correspondence is, to me, a sign of how rough and outline-like these schemes are, not about how accurate they are. Like, I can give you a physical theory that says tomorrow something will happen, right? This is accurate because it's very rough, right? But you see the point. It's not really a virtue of it that it can fit something because it's saying so little. I think they're saying a little bit more than that, obviously, because they're trying to get this something like the structure of seen and seeing, and there being a common element that they have to share in order to be in communication. You could find correspondences of that in modern physical thinking, certainly. Okay, I don't know if that helps. Did we exhaust the immediate questions on this triangle? I realize that I've been just explaining what the Platonic triangles are, rather than anything about, why would anyone think this, and what is this doing for him, and is there any truth in it, right? It's one thing to just know what the heck he's saying. The thing which is presented almost as a mystery here by Heidegger is, why is the thing at the top of this realm of the intelligibles called the idea of the good? And his answer to that is basically to reverse the question. We don't think of the idea of the good as having some other independent content that we then go off and put in this place in the scheme. We think of this place in the scheme as the origin of what Plato means by the idea of the good. What Plato means by the idea of the good is whatever has this place in the scheme, right? It is that which empowers being and truth in the realm of the intelligibles. Anything that has that role is what Plato is talking about. So almost definitionally, what we mean by idea of the good for Plato is whatever is an intelligible empowering of the being and truth in the realm of the intelligibles.
Question.
Yes.
Actually, a statement. I was actually I contemplated trying to come up with an idea of what agathon is an abstraction of. Didn't get me anywhere. But is it?
Right. It is. It has another formal definition, and for that you got to just sort of jump to straight to the Plato to see what he means. But what every soul pursues, and for the sake of which it does everything. That's what good means.
A teleos of some bucks, kind of.
Good. The original, if I put it this way, the formal notion of good that is used for the definition that might fill these roles in the scheme is what a soul seeks. Okay. The soul is a good-seeking missile, right? So if you want to know what good is, look at what souls are pursuing. So for the sake of Eros yeah. I mean, there's definitely some places in the Symposium where these things are related to one another, although it tends to be done through beauty in the case of Eros. But you should add what a sighted or wise soul would pursue, and for the sake of which a sighted or wise soul would do everything. Right? At which point you're saying, oh, but you just begged the question by telling you it was wise. Wise in what way? Wise in seeking the good. He knows. He's already made the joke, right? So when he said that the sophisticated think of the good as prudence, and you ask them prudence about what, and they'll tell you about the good and the bad, right? So, but the good formally is what wise souls seek, and for which the reason for wise souls do everything that they do. Okay, so that's the formal definitional concept that whatever the thing which actually is the thing itself has to fulfill. But Plato will tell you the definition of the word and the definition of the word do not tell you the thing. You have to have the word, the definition of the word, an image of what it means, an actual idea that you can get to tie those things together, and then you have to have some dialectical understanding of what might actually exist in the world that would actually fulfill all those criteria. How the machinery could work inside, so there could be a one real thing that had all those characteristics. And if you can't do that, there's probably something wrong with the concept. But if it's a natural thing, you probably can find something that can do those things. That's just sort of general Platonic method.
Somewhere I read, or maybe I just made it up, that, and I have it written here, said the good cannot be inquired about propositionally or discursively.
It's not that it can't be inquired about that way, it's that you're not going to get a discursive definition of it that captures it all. And Heidegger himself says something like that, where he says that he talks about you can only come before the silent by inquiry, something like that. But you're not going to find an exhaustive definition of it that just snares it in words and thereby have and possess it, right? It's not that sort of thing.
Page 79 is that as only the rigor of questioning do we come into the vicinity of the unsayable.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, I got it.
But was that obvious, or is that just take you into the vicinity of the unsayable and leave you there?
No, actually, I have written it down as a note. I mean, as a salient note that I wanted to capture completely separate from this exercise, because I thought that was pretty insightful.
So I mean, Plato says it is not sayable like other things we can learn, and the things we can learn, by the way, are mathemata, right? The mathematical. That's what you can learn. But I agree with Heidegger. I think Heidegger is fair to Plato and to philosophy in general on this point, but only the pure question become divinity in the vicinity of the unstable. You get this in many philosophies, this notion that there's something about the core concepts of what they're getting at that you have to dance around and understand by wrestling with the question, not by parsing a sentence, right? So, and I think Heidegger is also right to think that the way to try to figure out what Plato means by the idea of the good is to struggle with the role that it has in this scheme he's laying out for you. And that's fair to Plato because that's how Plato has Socrates answer the question. I mean, Glaucon in the Republic just wants a straightforward answer to the question of what Socrates thinks the good is. And Socrates' first answer is, I don't know, so why would I pretend I can tell you? And he says, well, then tell me at least what it seems like to you. And he tells him this whole scheme, right? That's his answer to the question. So it is a fair characterization of how vague or formulaic Plato is about what he means by the idea of the good, that this laid out metaphysical scheme along with this definitional what souls seek is what he means by it. James? Other
Yeah,
James?
can we try to understand the good as part of the one, as opposed to, the many?
Yes. So the Neoplatonists, as opposed to the original Platonists, but the Neoplatonists played all kinds of games with the top of this little Platonic metaphysical hierarchy, and some of them assimilated the good in the idea of the good in Plato to the Parmenidean one, and others put the one higher, others put the good higher. Some of them put a nothing above the one, which was above the good. Most of them put the one and the good on the same level. When I say most of them, I'm thinking of people like Plotinus and people like Dionysius the Areopagite. But the correspondences or lack thereof between the Platonic understanding of the idea of the good and the previous Parmenidean understanding of the one is absolutely what, it's the sort of metaphysical question that Neoplatonism worries about more than anything else. And the story that is told about Plato that he once gave a public talk on the idea of the good says that he kept mentioning the one and Parmenides and also things like measure and so on. And supposedly the conclusion of the lecture was that therefore the good is the one, something like that. That was the supposed conclusion of the public lecture that the Neoplatonists hang their hat on, right? Okay, but again, this is stories told hundreds of years after the event by people who claim that they heard it from someone who heard it from, so who knows if a Neoplatonist made up the entire story. But yes, the other place you'll see a relation between these things is if you go back to other dialogues of Plato, the Parmenides. There is a dialectical method used in the Parmenides that is trying to reason about being and the one. And in the Republic, when he's trying to explain how what the method is for using the truly intelligible as opposed to the mathematical, Socrates says that method is dialectics, and he says that you, starting from hypotheses, arrive at a position that does not have hypotheses. And the only place you find in Platonic dialogues that seems to be an instance of that method is Plato's Parmenides, where it's Parmenides who's showing this method. And he's using it to arrive very aphoretically at, a contradiction from every possible set of original premises about whether or not the one is and the many are, or the many are and the one are not, and so forth. So anyway, the point is Neoplatonism and the Parmenides are where to go to learn chapter and verse and all this stuff. We covered a bunch of it when we did Deidre Carabine's book on the unknown God, but it's there's a whole separate ancient metaphysical 300 to 500 year line of doctrines about the subject. Does that help?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. Now I'm really confused.
Yeah. So I mean, the original idea of one was not the idea of the good. The original idea of one is just something which is supposed to be unitary and contain no contradiction. But but that's so contradictory a concept that you can derive weird things about it almost immediately. And that's basically what the dialectic of Parmenides does. It just finds all kinds of weird, unintuitive contradictions in the very notion of one. So that would be the place to start. But you won't find the ideal. You will find the idea of the ideas at the beginning of the Parmenides, because it starts off with Socrates, young Socrates, who's a teenager, explaining to old Parmenides what his theory of the ideas is, Parmenides shooting it down and then explaining to him dialectics and giving all this dialectical arguments about the one.
Of course, Hegel would probably explain the good as this the dialectic itself, right? That achieve a
Absolutely.
higher, right.
And not only would he will crib shamelessly from Dionysius the Areopagite as he does so in chapter and in verse. There's all kinds of correspondences, especially between Hegel's logic and the various later Neoplatonists, if you want to look them up. Fair question. It's just taking us far afield, but I mean, you're right to raise all these things. I mean, one of the things to say is that this schema in Plato is infamously obscure, and its infamous obscurity was the reason that many, weighted Frady doctrines and large things were read into it. And I think it's fair to say that Heidegger wrestling with it here is presenting something much more immediately intelligible than the things you get in some of the Neoplatonism, which is much more speculative metaphysics side of things, right? Whereas here, Heidegger is staying closer to the original Plato and also closer to the motivation from understanding truth that I think is actually exercising Plato. My point is, this is a place where I think Heidegger is actually a pretty good guide to why Plato is thinking these things. Plato is trying to understand how truth happens. And by truth happening, he doesn't just mean to a mind in time. He means something like actual intelligibility of an eternal truth. How does that happen? That's the actual motivation, I think, for this structure in Plato. I think Heidegger is right about that. Okay. I already talked about divided line stuff. Talk about dialectical truth stuff. The next thing I want to talk about at the end of this section, before we even get to the next one, first of all, he calls it the empowerment of that upon which all depends. I think that is an accurate characterization of what Plato wants the idea of the good to be. The one thing we should talk about there before we leave that section is Heidegger's insistence that he's not talking about morals, right? And that he doesn't want you to drag in your assumption that you must be talking about value in a 19th century Nietzschean sense or something as being what the idea of the good is. And I think that's fair. It's a mistake someone could easily make to not see that this is fundamentally a metaphysical idea about the nature of truth or something like that. But that doesn't mean it's completely divorced from morals, because there's still this notion that good is something like what souls seek. And there's also some notion here that something like truth is what souls seek. That's what wise souls seek. That the notion that there is something not just empowering, that's there too, it is an empowering, but it is also a depth of man's essence sort of thing that Heidegger brings out accurately, I think is fair, but also a most choice-worthy in itself, something like that, about a dialectical understanding of the nature of absolute truth, right? That's not completely divorced from morals. It is a lodestar for morals compared to other notions of morals. Carlos?
Well, I want to ask a question, but I want to kind of retrieve it because I'm not sure. I'm thinking this sounds like a categorical imperative from Kant.
Yeah, I mean, It's somewhat categorical. It's not really anything like the same structure of, you know, a logical concept that will fulfill these categories that you get in Kant. And it's nothing to do with that sort of goodness of will or people as ends. It's more about something like a capability for truth and a kind of duty that comes with that capability for truth. There's something about truth which is just compelling in itself, right? Something like that. But the idea that what souls seek is something like truth. That's I think that's a core thought in Plato, and I don't think it's divorced from his morals. I don't think it's divorced from him thinking that the philosophical life is the highest life. I don't think it's divorced from his notion that the unexamined life is not worth living. I think it's to pretend that that is not a doctrine with moral consequences is to ignore the history of Platonism and Platonism's influence on, you know, tons of later Western history, right? This is not an idea which is divorced from moral consequence. It's not an idea whose original content is, you know, I had some thought about morals and I put it up here at the top of my hierarchy, the other way around.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Any Ryan, question?
Just yeah, kind of a comment. Just going on what you said. Yeah, I would. I think agree that it's impossible to divorce morals from Plato. I mean, Republic from beginning to end basically speaks about living well as distinct from, you know, living poorly, both in terms of the individual and the city as a whole. So yeah, I have trouble seeing Plato as thinking of himself as having a, I don't know, kind of agnostic view of it or indifference to it.
Yeah, it's not agnostic or indifference. What Heidegger is trying to bring out is that there is something that is just empowering of being in truth about the idea of the good in Plato, that's sort of a role it's playing in a metaphysical scheme, and that is not simply the same as a moralizing sermon to eat your spinach, right? He's not telling you to eat your spinach, right? It's not, and I'm trivializing it that way because I think it's dismissing that kind of trivial misunderstanding that Heidegger is actually about, right? He doesn't want people to think that when you say the highest idea is the idea of the good, you're saying that the most important thing in life is to be nice to each other. He's not saying that. That's not what Plato is saying at all, right? He's talking about what makes truth possible. And he's not saying what makes truth possible is being nice to each other, right?
Right, but is not Plato's understanding of the good, you know, connected to, well, teleological and connected to nature and reaching kind of a perfecting the nature of man?
Yes, it may be related to not distorting, to service to truth, to not lying, to truthfulness, or in that sense. There may be all kinds of other things that it is connected to that may have moral import, but I'm trying to just show that that's the direction the arrows are flowing. The arrows are flowing from, I start with this, I have philosophical reasons for regarding this as something of supreme importance, and having already had those, they then have moral implications. Not, I was looking for a place to have moral implications, and I, you know, found it up here as this highest idea, right? It's not that. Nick?
Yeah, Jason, there are, maybe just to help clarify some of the statements, which I understand, but I think it would
Sure.
be good to get elaborated. On
Sure.
page 88, the first paragraph, I guess there are two words there, the idea of empowering, the good is empowering. The other thing is the idea that the good is prior to everything else.
Yes.
So the statement is, the good, the agathon, is therefore the enablement of being as such, and unhidenness and such. Or better, what Plato calls the good is that which empowers being and unhiddenness to their own essence, i.e. what is prior to everything else, that upon which everything else depends. So
Correct.
so the idea, what empowerment.
So,
of
so the
being
thing that you actually find in Republic, right, is he's talking to Glaucon and he's explained to him how there's this one thing of truth that yokes together the knowledge and the thing known, or the knower and the thing known, the mind and the thing known, but that that is itself provided. All three of them are provided their nature and existence by the idea of the good. And he says, therefore, the idea of the good surpasses even being is usually translated in dignity and power, but the actual word for power is correctly translated dynamis. The word that is usually translated dignity is presbyst. It's the same word as presbysters. It's the oldest and most and strongest, the oldest and most powerful. So the older than being, more powerful than being. And Glaucon's response is, he swears by Apollo that this is a demonic excess, and Socrates says he says this most ridiculously. But this is where you get the famous notion that the good in Plato is beyond being. It is an origin older than being and more powerful than being. There's lots of ways that was understood later, but the underlying idea is that something like thought, truth, and the being that is thought are in correspondence with one another. Being and truth are coextensive in the sense that what is and what is true are coextensive, and they are thought. The old notion you get in Parmenides is that thinking and being are the same. The thinking and being that are the same are coextensive with truth, that whole group. But the idea of the good, it puts a point of origin underneath that triad. And that position of something which is metaphysically prior to that triad is why the Neoplatonists equated that position with that of the one in Parmenides and with the one in their theologies, right? So they made that one a theological idea. That's what the Neoplatonists did, basically.
Yeah, so I think that so the good is prior. I think I get those. But what is the empowering? What is it? What does the good enable us to do then? Is it to see the truth, or what is the empowering?
Well, in the same way that light enables sight to occur, truth enables true thought to occur. And true thought is thought of being. So the being thought and the thinking of it are both enabled by truth. What provides the light of truth? In Plato, the good is the word for what provides the light of truth. And he even distinguishes between those things which have the light of truth in that sense and those things which are so murky that they don't. There are things that you can understand because there's more truth in them. They are more intelligible in themselves. And there's things about which you can only have opinions, and murky opinions at that, because there isn't enough truth in them. They are distorted image-like, changing, whatever. They're not fully intelligible. But the fully intelligible is fully intelligible because it is enabled to be by truth. Does that help?
Okay. That does help. But the idea of the good, I keep thinking about it. It's very abstract.
Yes.
Is there like
it's meant to be abstract. It's not meant to be something where you can just fill in, square or circle in place of it, and the reason will go through. This is part of Heidegger's point here, that its role in this scheme is the most substantive thing that Plato ever says about it. The other things he says about it is it has something in common with measure. He says that it is what souls seek, or wise souls seek, those sorts of things, which are, again, even more formulaic. But this role in its scheme is the most substantive thing Plato ever says about it.
well, did he intend, or the people at that time think of it as a god or some sort? The good? Or no?
So
Never.
certainly some of the Neoplatonists after Plato did, and certainly some of the Christian Neoplatonists did. Plato likens it to Helios, and he calls Helios a god.
Hmm.
But he's calling Helios a god to someone who is swearing by Apollo at him, right? So how much does that mean to him?
Thanks.
Fair question. Joe?
Yes. I see the analogy that he's using here, because he starts with the Helios and he deduces, visible and things to be seen. And then he goes to this realm of the, mental seeable or mental perception things. And he's making an argument by analogy. And since high school, I've been very suspicious of arguments by analogy. I see how important it is to the schema, but the schema has to justify itself separately by its analogy to the Helios, I think.
Sure, and I mean the to the extent that there's any sketch of that substantive thing as opposed to the analogy, it is only this claim about the divided line relationship between the things of which they're images and the real things of which they are the images in the realm of the perceptibles are being lined up with the mathematical things in the intelligible realm and the things which are known by dialectic without an hypothesis in the intellectual realm. So at bottom, that means the final appeal of to the truly intelligible is to what is knowable by dialectic, right? So something being fully known by dialectical reasoning is the non-analogy appeal, right?
That's why we get the questioning, the importance of questioning in the dialogue process.
Yes, absolutely. And all of this within the typical Socratic bracket of he is explaining all of this as his current opinion on these things under objection, having previously allowed that he didn't know. And this is only how it seems to him, right? That's the typical Socratic objection or qualification. It's why it's all questioning. Yeah. Okay. So I now want to just jump to the section 15 for a section, which is the very end of the idea of the good things, where he's not only just summing up, but he's tying back to why we looked at this in the first place. And suddenly you hear a word over and over again from Heidegger that you never see in Plato: history, right? Question concerning the history of man's essence and his paideia, his education, or his culture. But what's the point here? The point here is that Heidegger is bringing out this role of all of this is saying something about a fundamental capability of man to know truth. And by the way, I think that Heidegger entirely agrees with that. I think that Heidegger, in his own understanding of the Dasein being relation and and man being up to the height of understanding that relation or something like that, standing in that relation as being a highest or essential capacity of man, he thinks that Plato is talking about the same thing there, and that's his own standard of what counts as, this way, meaningful intellectual action, if those are the right terms for it. And that's why he calls this something about the history of man's essence. There's an underlying claim here which is about history, and it's not coming from Plato, it's coming from Heidegger. And the claim is that Plato matters in the history of man's essence because Plato is part of the history of being. Plato is part of the time.
This is the time thing, once again, that Heidegger is objecting. His awareness that time is the factor.
It is an awareness of time, but it's also a different understanding of something like moral orientation. because the orientation that you find from Heidegger is on a height dimension, not on a moral good dimension. It's a, are you living up to the height of man's essence? Are you doing the things that man is capable of doing, that man is most capable of doing, that man is uniquely capable of doing? And that means if you are taking part in the history of being. And Heidegger is saying Plato here was taking part in the history of being. He was part of the unveiling of nature to man. When he makes the casual reference to the tram, right, he's saying because people confronted what it is to understand nature, right, it's not a stretch to say physics arises from trying to understand, from wrestling with physis. That these reorientation in Plato is a founding of a civilizational long interest in truth and understand and struggle for truth as something like man's highest calling, right? So there's a notion of calling here. There's a notion of history here that says participation in the discovery about the nature of being and participation in the discovery about the nature of truth is man's purpose, is man's destiny, is man's highest activity, something like that. And when Heidegger says to participate in this, we have to make this our own and we have to go over this ground ourselves again, he is inviting you to that. Carlos, question.
Excuse me. So it's a history of how man's essence has been perceived. Is that a history of man's essence?
He's not talking about just a history of how man's essence is perceived. He's talking about what Heidegger calls the history of being appearing to man. He thinks the truth of being has a history. Truth happens. This is a point Pete often makes of there's a difference between 2 + 2 = 4 being something which is always true, and when I discovered that 2 + 2 is equal to 4 in elementary school, right? Truth is also something that happens. Truth is also something that has to be discovered. Truth has a history, and particularly the unveiling of the nature of being has a history. The unveiling of the nature of truth has a history. Not only that, it's a history with epochs. The essence of truth changes. The essence of truth is understood one way at one time and another way at another time. And some of those changes are improvements and some of them are not. But there is a whole drama of this history, and taking part in it is something like man's philosophical calling, right? And I'm pointing out this is all Heidegger, right? That standard is not coming from the Plato, except to the extent that Plato is also a philosopher and thinks of a philosophical life as something like the highest life. So, but thinking of that primarily in these historical terms, all Heidegger. Ryan? Sorry, you're still on mute, Ryan.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not familiar with Heidegger at all beyond just getting into this. So did Heidegger take the historicist, notion or insight or philosophical track, whatever you want to call it, for granted, or does he, attempt to prove it as correct at some point?
Oh, he's absolutely all about proving it. I mean, and some of that is relating directly to categories of time, and some of it is his understanding of the history of metaphysics. His works on Nietzsche, in particular, are wrestling with Nietzsche's own understanding of history of Western philosophy as the history of nihilism, something like that, and his own reaction to that. So he is definitely, it's not the focus here, but he is definitely concerned with trying to argue that that is in fact the case, and to situate his own work in that history. And when he talks about things like the end of metaphysics, that's the kind of thing he's talking about. The place you'll find this, it's in lots of places, but the place you'll find this most heavily thematized is his works on Nietzsche, in part because he is reacting to Nietzsche's own understanding of Western history and nihilism. So yes, he's not just assuming it. It's a major problematic in his whole work. Great question, Nick.
Yeah, this particular statement here in page 93 in this section we're looking at.
Yep.
And the last part where he says, we do not understand philosophy as blah, 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 5 points, talking about existence. But then he defines philosophy as a questioning which in a fundamental way changes Dasein, man, and the understanding of being.
Yes.
So I kind of read this as the movement in history of man's essence is really well driven by the philosophical thinking, the philosophical questioning that uncovers and makes Dasein. Is that a fair inference?
Yes, he's saying the history that actually matters is the history of being. And the reason that philosophy matters is because it's where the history of being transpires. It doesn't matter because it's a cultural phenomena. It doesn't matter because it has interesting personalities in it. It doesn't matter because it's a useful part of the university that teaches scientists certain things. Doesn't matter because it provides worldviews to political parties or anything like that. It is instead where man learns about his relationship to the whole and to truth, and where that knowing is worked out, struggled with, right? So this is an almost religious calling version of the importance of philosophy, if I can put it that way. Man's relation to being is at stake in changing philosophical epochs. The place where you get this most before Heidegger from another philosopher would be Nietzsche.
Okay.
Sorry, Jim, you had a raised
Yeah.
hand / question.
Yes. Okay. So how does he? Okay. So Plato would not agree, from my understanding, that the nature of being or truth has to be time bound and historical, temporal, the way Heidegger would frame it. How does Heidegger fit Plato into this way of understanding when Plato would have said, no, the truth is before history, quote unquote? How does he reconcile it?
So fair question. I mean, the first point is just because he's not a Platonist, right? I mean, in his own scheme, right, the idea of the good is not the horizon upon which being is understood. Time is, for one. We saw that at the end of our reading of Basic Problems of Phenomenology, right? The horizon upon which being is understood is time, and the ontological differences between being and beings understood on the category of time. That's even early Heidegger. Later Heidegger is going to have his own metaphysical schemes that might in some ways seem more Platonist, but they're definitely formally Platonist, but they are definitely tied to event, happening, actuality, the evidence of appearing. So he's not a Platonist. He's not going to adopt all these elements of the Platonic scheme. He is primarily interested in how Plato discovered some of this territory, laid out some of these things. The other thing we're just getting into, though, is the places where he is critical of Plato. Are there things about the understanding of truth that you get in Plato that are, in Heidegger's terms, in Heidegger's sense, incorrect, or incorrect is the wrong term. They have left something out. They have missed something. They have forgotten something. There's a I don't remember exactly what it is, but there's a place where he says these strongest experiences of the ancient understanding of truth that have been lost, something like that. But what he means by the strongest experiences are these notes of hiddenness and unhiddenness. So he thinks that there are things which he can detect in earlier Greek thinking that had a deeper understanding of some aspects of truth and how truth happens and man's relation to truth, then he finds in Plato. He does want to go over the ground that Plato went over. He is learning things from Plato. He is using all this to, explain Plato. But he is not a Platonist, and he's going to have his own understanding of those things. So does he have to reconcile them? No, he can just criticize Plato on point after point, right? He's allowed to disagree with Plato, and he does. Does that work?
It helps me. Yes, I understand that. I'm just sorting out. For me, I
So I mean,
get what he's doing. I just don't buy it.
Well, he's definitely, he thinks of the Platonic scheme as having elements in it which are have forgotten things. There's in some of those respects, he is indebted to criticisms of Plato that you find in Aristotle, and in some ways he's indebted to criticisms of Plato that you find in Nietzsche, but some of them are entirely his own. So it's not a derivative distinguishing of himself from Plato, and it's also not a complete one. One of the things we want to get to in the next section is where Plato is presented as just the paradigm of a philosopher engaging with the essential questions that to be emulated, and where he is someone who missed something or forgot something or distorted something. Nick, then Ryan. We'll do Nick first.
I guess I'll just push a little bit more on James' question. So just kind of elaborating a little bit more on this history that Heidegger talks about, history of the essence of man. I mean, is that supposed to be the lived society, or how man is going to evolve, or is it a history of ideas and unhiding of the true essence based on just thinking, philosophizing? Or I mean, what is this history that we're talking that he's envisioning? That is,
it is the history of man's understanding of being and understanding of truth, and of man's orientation towards truth, whether or not man is oriented towards truth, and whether or not he serves truth. As I said, there's an almost religious calling of philosophy aspect to this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the thing to understand is, for Heidegger, that's the most important thing about any age or time. It's way more important than anything about cultural history or political history or any of those sorts of things, about which he does not care, except to the extent they might bear upon those things, right? The most important thing to know about the Greeks is Greek thought, especially Greek philosophical thought. The most important thing to know about the medievals is what philosophical thought there was in the Middle Ages, with some of that being theological thought, to be sure, right? The most important thing to understand about early modern times is, how early modern philosophy, changed things about the medieval world and invented modern science, which revolutionized the world as a result. All of those things are of historical importance, first and foremost, because they are changing aspects of man's relationship to the truth, right? So this is very much the claim that cultural history, as intellectual history, as history of man's relation to truth, is the single most important thing in history, and drives all the rest of history. And by the way, that notion that sort of cultural history drives all the rest of history was a commonplace in the 19th century. Everybody thought it. Nietzsche thought it. Heinrich Heine thinks it. Right? Hegel thinks it in a way. But certainly Heidegger thinks it.
Okay, so the drivers of these history are, the ideas, cultural ideas, like the Enlightenment, science. These are created by philosophers.
It's not just that. I mean, so someone like a Heine might think that the philosophers are important because they derive political ideas, which derive political events. That's not Heidegger at all. That version of the arc thinks that only if something impacts political life does it matter. Heidegger's the other way around, right? Does it affect man's relationship to truth? If it doesn't matter. not as much, at least. It's not living on the plane of man's essence. It's not living on the plane of what man can do. Man can be in communication with truth. Is he? Then he's alive. If he's not, he's down in the cave staring at a wall.
All right. So there's still this notion then that is Heidegger trying to get to the truth, but rather than what I think of the pragmatist.
I understand.
Making truth or creating.
Yeah, he's not talking about creating or making, but he's also not just getting at it, because the point is that it has a history. It does have a history. There is action in it, but the action is not making. The action is discovery and forgetting.
Okay.
Fine questions. Who else had their hand up? Sorry, Jim.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, Jim before Ryan.
Yeah. So the thing that's troubling to me is it seems as he sort of forces you into a place where you're going to have to create your own philosophy, because I'm never going to completely agree with Heidegger and I'm not going to completely agree with Plato, but I mean, just understanding their ideas is enough, but the weight of trying to say, well, I've talked about modular units, how can I make my own philosophy? That's daunting, because that's where I think that's where he's leaving us.
Well, he doesn't particularly care if you don't make your own philosophy, because he's not particularly worried about what you're doing. There's a place in the Introduction to Metaphysics where he explains that it is absolutely correct that we cannot do anything with philosophy in the sense that the technologists want us to do things with philosophy, but the alternative asserts itself. If we concern itself with it, philosophy might be able to do something with us. Right, that's his view of it. Right, that this is not something where he doesn't have an expectation that every man will be enlightened by this. Right, that the audience is the future philosopher and the potential philosophers, and the potential philosophers only to the extent that they are useful and helpful to the unfolding of future philosophy. Now, there are a few other things that you get in some of the other parts of Heidegger where he cares a little bit about some of these other cultural things a little bit more than that. But at bottom, that's not misleading. At bottom, the history that matters to him is a history made by, a relatively small number of people. But honestly, it's not just that, because he thinks that there are elements of what philosophers do and think which are informed by their time, informed by whole peoples, right? The Greek language taught the Greeks things that the Greek thinkers, revealed, something like that. But he is definitely of this, typical, I can say, Burkhartian 19th century heroic historical opinion that peoples live in the intellectual acts and actions of their great men. Right? That's what matters about them. I don't know. It doesn't have to satisfy you for you to understand that that's where he's coming from. That is where he's coming from. Ryan?
I think you might have kind of answered some of it, but just what I was trying to square was, so would Heidegger have said, like, the philosophical life would be the highest life then? Like, would that be his opinion on it, or?
Probably. I mean, he does occasionally bring in a few others. He talks about the role of art. He talks about he does occasionally bring in others that he certainly. You might even say the poetic life is higher than the philosophic life to some of them, because he at some point he points to the most thoughtful poets as being as having the thoughts of philosophers before the philosophers can make them rigorous, right? So I'm not. Even that, though, you can tell it's important because of its impact on philosophy. So it's not exclusive. It's not an exclusive one job description club, right? But it is something like peak spiritual culture, right? Which has, philosophy and some things which are philosophy adjacent in religion and art and things like that.
So does he judge the importance of things, or I guess change on the basis of just its historical consequences? Then that's what's really matters to him.
No, not because the historical consequences often, forgetting. There's nothing about the unfolding history that guarantees that it is anything like an upward march. There's no no, it's not. He's not rating these things on historical impact, right? He does care about the historical impact. He cares about the history of that unfolding, but he cares about it as for its truth too, right? For are people seeing farther? Is what they're seeing true? Have they all the usual cultural insight things, which are not simply the same as how much influence did it have, or how many people believed it, or anything like that, right? In many ways, he's an individualist of the Kierkegaardian variety on that sort of point, right? He doesn't care if it influenced a crowd. You see a lot of that in the places where he's constantly having these dismissive comments about the sort of current man in the street version of philosophical thought chasing after him, and he'll chasing the buzzwords of what he did 5 or 10 years ago, right? He's continually dismissive of that. Some of his bidding criticisms of Jasper or of that variety, or is talking about how at least the Greeks didn't know about lived experience, which is trying to say that I wrote about a bunch of stuff about that in Being in Time, and people have been just repeating what I said about it in shallower and shallower ways ever since, right? That's not what I'm talking about, right?
In that case, does that not suggest there's an element of internalness, or like the eternal in truth, and it's not relative to time?
Not to him. There certainly are Platonists who would insist upon something like that, but not to him. To him, it's an event, it's a history, it's a story, it's an unfolding. It has more in common with a Christian theodicy than it does with a static eternal truth. It's more like a salvation story than it is like a with critical phases than it is like a just a static, unchanging picture. But other things which would be useful in this, if you want to know more about that, it would be some of his works on Nietzsche, also his other essay called On the Essence of Truth in these basic writings, where he talks about the history of errancy, any of his stuff about the event. But if you're curious about those aspects, Jim. Jim's hand is up, but he's on mute, and his video's off. I can't tell if it's just left over. Okay, so part of that at the end of 2 was tying this together as what the cave allegory was supposed to be about. It was about this orientation of man towards truth itself as like a highest calling thing. And to that degree, it is faithful to Plato, him calling that reorientation towards truth itself a matter of the history of man's essence, is his own gloss, is his own understanding of something going on here, right? All right. All of that just takes us to the end of 2. Now we got to talk about 3, where he switches to the essence of untruth. But before that, any further questions on part 2 before we turn to the untruth parts? Carlos, are we good to go to 3?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so on the essence of untruth thing, there's like at least 3 major things to say. One is to make sure we just are clear about what the fundamental idea is. We talked about a little bit about this in the intro, but I can't to go over again about the aletheia having the opposite, which is based upon its privative, lethe, or what is usually translated as its opposite and given as its opposite, pseudos. So is the opposite of the true the pseudo, or is the opposite of the true the still concealed? If untruth is truth is unconcealment, then untruth is concealment. But very often in Greek, you find that the opposite of the true is not given as forgetfulness, which is what the actual word lethe becomes, not even concealment in general, but forgetfulness. That's what the opposite, if you take the A off of an aletheia, you get letheia, or you get lethe, or forgetting. The oblivion of forgetting, something like that. But it also just literally means concealed. It's just the dominant meaning of concealed has come to be the sense of forgotten. So that's why there's a river of forgetting in Greek afterlife. But if you ask for just the opposite in most texts of what the Greeks mean by false, it's pseudos. It's pseudos, which means pseudo or fake or distorted or something like that. So the accent leaves concealment and it becomes something like correct versus distorted. The opposite of the pseudo is the ortho, or the straight, right? So you've got something straight, you've got something correct, or you've got something distorted. So the underlying claim in this section is that the notion of untruth, and he's not quite clear on when this exactly happens, but changes from being being concealed to being fake, distorted, pseudos, false. Okay, and the claim on page 116 is that what's wrong with this is that these most stirring fundamental experiences of ancient existence shriveled up, disintegrated, and faded into everyday self-evidence. And the philosophy that follows is therefore supposedly rootless, has lost its connection to its past. That's what he means by rootless. So what are these most striking fundamental experiences of ancient existence? They are the experiences of concealment and unconcealment as being fundamental to the nature of truth. And with concealment and unconcealment having all the dimensions of time for Aristotle, not Aristotle, for Heidegger, right? So the not yet unconcealed, the no longer unconcealed, are both elements of concealment that have nothing to do with fakeness, that have nothing to do with distortion, right? The undiscovered country, the unexplored mystery is the opposite of truth. Not false, but unknown. Okay. So now we mentioned as we were going through the stuff on Plato that he is himself continually talking about what he doesn't know, and he's continually talking about discovery. And if there's anything in the allegory of the cave, it's distinguishing between the true world and the apparent world, or claiming that the apparent is not the true or not the real. And that's got to be a concealment. Sorry, right? So Plato knows something about there being a concealment aspect of truth. And he knows something about there being a discovery aspect of philosophy. And he knows something about there being a persistent unknown. But none of those are what Heidegger would regard as an adequate understanding of the fundamental experience of ancient existence as understanding truth as unconcealment. And the thing which bothers Heidegger most is that they've lost the accent or note of it as a happening, as an event, as an achievement, not even just an achievement, but an achievement that unconcealment occurs. Knowing that unconcealment occurs, that it has the character of an actuality, right? And that's the part that we saw was kind of elated in all the discussion of the divided line, where we talk about the realm of within time, the realm of the actual as being something about which there couldn't be pure noetic understanding, something like that. Heidegger thinks that something about truth occurring has been lost in the switch to pseudos as being the opposite of true. Okay. I still think that it's quite hard to track exactly where in this section 3, Plato goes from being the model of the philosophical life, that it is the highest calling to emulate, to being the guy who got unconcealment so wrong that we are that only rootless philosophy exists thereafter, right? That's quite a somersault to turn in a few pages, and the actual somersault seems to occur in a single paragraph, right? There's not a ton of argumentation for how it is Plato that went wrong in Pseudos. Now, to some degree, I'm anticipating because we're going to get this whole dialogue where he's going to substantiate the claim. So far, we've got a promissory note, right? You'll see when I talk about what Plato says about untruth and error in the Theaetetus, that he has replaced unhiddenness with correctness. And you will see that he has replaced the opposite of truth from the concealed by the false or the distorted. That's the sort of claim he's issued. He hasn't proved it yet, in my opinion. But that's what he's claiming our analysis of the Theaetetus will get us. He also says, though, that he just wants to do this because he wants to go over that short and steep stretch of road where Plato lived this and figured it out. So he's still emulating Plato as the example of the philosophical life in reading the Theaetetus, but he's also, toward the end of 3, claiming that this is the place where we're going to see the grand historical error where philosophy becomes rootless. Okay, I want you to notice how much he has promised about what he can do with one history, right? It's not obvious that Plato can be both the exemplar of the highest calling of man to the philosophical life and the place where philosophy goes off the rails and philosophy becomes rootless. But we've been simultaneously told the same, both those things in section 3. Okay. I have my own slight suspicion on the topic, which I can confess to you as we're explaining what seems to us about things we don't know, and as a little bit of a Platonist myself. Part of the losing sight of the grand philosophical possibility of which the Greek philosophers were guilty is that they did not anticipate all the things that Heidegger only discovered several years after the conclusion of Being and Time. That's where they went off the rails, right? Because they should have seen everything in Being and Time, and about 3 or 5 years beyond, then they would have had it right. And to which my attitude is, fair enough, but is this history, right? If we're going to talk about these things having a history, then Heidegger should show up as someone who has discovered something important in Being and Time and has already gone beyond it by the early 30s. And if he's showing up that way, those can't be that little bit of progress, or the little bit of progress immediately beyond it, cannot be the standard whereby philosophy 2,000 years ago is judged on its contribution. It cannot be an error of 2,000-year-old philosophy that it didn't see steps that he didn't see until 5 years before, or 2 years before, or during this lecture course. Okay, so I appeal to the absurdity of the standard. It's not history. Does that mean that he didn't see something that is a possible insight about that the Greeks might have also had? No, he can still see things that the Greeks could have seen. He can still make progress over the Greeks. If he tells me something critically important about the nature of aletheia and the nature of man's experience of truth, I'm all ears, right? Just don't tell me that Plato was supposed to have seen it, right? That's silly. Okay, anyway, that's my general take on 3. I'm all ears about whether or not it is Plato who replaces the concealed by the fake, or whether or not it was, as Rosen contended in the book we read last time, Aristotle who did so. Yeah, okay. All right, so I've given you my reaction both to what I think is right about this. There is a change in seeing unhiddenness being primarily about distortion. I think that unhiddenness, untruth as distortion may be more important than Heidegger makes it out to be. I don't think it's simply an analog of truth as correctness. I think that there are even moral aspects as well as this human calling aspects of truth as distortion that he could pay more attention to. I think that untruth as distortion, it definitely has a major career in Western thought, not just philosophical, but also moral and religious, even mythological. And I think that some of that is already there in Plato when he's taking on Protagoras, because I think that to Plato, Protagoras and sophistic relativism specifically is to Plato a distortion. His fundamental disagreement with the sophists of his age is that they are distorters of the truth. They have abandoned truth for arguments that they think sound better, work better, rhetorically manage to manipulate the world, something like that. But that there is a abandonment of the standard of truth, something like that. So my point is, I'm a little bit with the antis, that there's something wrong with distortion, maybe even morally wrong with distortion. And I don't think that it's necessarily a shallower notion of untruth to be exercised about distortion, if I can put it that way. Distortion is not always simply innocent, is another way of putting this. But okay, I still agree that it is true that truth as mystery, untruth as unknown, and the notion of mystery is a important part of man's potential with respect to the truth, right? In any understanding of truth, the notion of prior mystery and unveiling should be there if it's to be true to the phenomena. That's my partial agreement with him on the aletheia business. Okay, just my own cards on the table. Nick, got a question?
Yeah, well, it's just a question or rather a comment, I guess. I'm kind of like not so. The question in my mind is why can't both be right? You know, because I mean they both I think are useful models in the sense that untruth as distortion. Well, one could look at a kind of a like a spectrum, and you can have distortion in varying degrees, and getting to be more untruth. And then there is that part of truth, which is, shall we say, unknown or incomplete, where you have something and it's like, and that is where the idea of unhiding and unconcealment comes in, that one can layer and layer and get in and go and get into the essence. But it's all like a linear kind of, looked at as a linear model where,
So
I'm gonna all the way to super distortion.
So I'm going to partly agree with you that both can be valid understandings of aspects of truth and how truth happens. I don't think they're on the same line. I don't think that the concealment unconcealment line for mystery and forgetfulness are quite the same thing as the just more or less distortion. I don't think they're on that line at all. I think they're off that line, but that's okay. The answer to your question is yes, both those aspects of truth can be important, insightful, important for philosophy, true in their own right, etc. Here's what can't be true. It can't be true that losing sight of unconcealment as the nature of truth in favor of distortion broke philosophy and made it rootless and condemned mankind to wander in a wilderness for 2,000 years as a result, right? That can't be true at the same time that both those other things you said are true, right? Both those other things can be useful aspects and important aspects of the truth, but it cannot be the case that only one of them is correct and the other one is an error that is a blind alley for 2,000 years, right? That claim needs more evidence than just the fact that I can see both these things. Pete.
Yeah, well, without getting into the 2,000-year-old claims about metaphysics, just in terms of veiling and pseudo being negative, I think they also have their positive aspects when used intentionally. So if you're not in error, you might use a pseudonym because you want to keep your privacy and you want to publish something. So you don't use your real name, but the people who read it, they realize, oh, this is a pseudonym. You're not tricking them into somebody else wrote this. You're just using a pseudonym positively. And just that there's times where you might need euphemism, or you don't want to unveil the complete truth, maybe for pedagogic reasons, that you're going down the path and you're gonna, like the Plato's cave, that you're going to go through stages of unveiling. So pseudo and hidden aren't just distortions or mistakes. They can actually be a positive, intentional part of speech and communication, or what have you.
Or non-communication. Right. I agree with you that that you can certainly have innocent uses of pseudo, sure. And I'll also agree with you that you can have pedagogical uses of mystery or keeping things veiled. Plato is famous in the second and seventh letter for talking about how there's some of these things cannot be written down. It would be a mistake to try to, and the belief that you could get all of them in a book, so there's notions of hidden like that you find in Plato too. That's different from the notion that the false as the distorted is an actual active enemy of something like man's calling or essence, right? Which is the post-Platonic moral notion that that you get with the turn to truth is correctness. And it is a moral notion. It's not simply a matter of it's not a historically indifferent, they can both be on their own notion. The Protagoras's and the Nietzsche's have something in common in claiming that truth for is anything you want it to be. And there's an element of that can be intentional distortion and a lie. And that's the kind of thing that Plato was actually exercised about when he talks about distortion, right? He's not saying that in a vacuum as though there are no sophists around him.
Right. So yeah, in sophistry, they're definitely trying to veil over the truth for the benefit of their client. Sort of like
not just for their client,
lawyer.
and not just for their client. What they're doing is they're taking man's calling to serve truth, that philosophical calling, and they are using the prestige of that calling for worldly purposes, not truthful purposes, right? And it's that is the moral conundrum of sophistry, right? So we'll get to some of these things when we get to the dialogue itself. There's things to be said for the absolutely philosophically to be said for the Protagorean thesis, for example. There are things to be said for the Nietzschean thesis, for that matter. But in its ancient and modern versions, there's also a legitimate beef, if I can put it this way, that some of the partisans of truth, right, have with the too flippant partisans of distortion, if I can put it that way. But anyway, I'm not prepared to say that to replace untruth as veiledness with untruth as distortion is all backsliding and is all error and is all losing some fundamental experience. It also has some things to be said in its favor, right? I do still want to keep the note of mystery and veiledness and unveiledness as part of the essence of truth and untruth, right? I think that that's an insight. I think that that's an insight. Some of that was there in the pre-Socratics. Some of that's been recovered by Heidegger. There's credit for recovering it. But I'm not prepared to say that all of the pasting that the pseudos got is undeserved. Let's put it that way. Ryan.
Yeah, just going through some of my comments here while I was reading. Heidegger mentions that what I guess he's striving for is a return into history such that it becomes our occurrence, and he differentiates that from just historical familiarity.
Yes.
What's he getting at there, I guess, concretely?
He's saying concretely, we either live in history in the sense that the history is ours, we're part of it, we're living in that history, or we're just looking at it from the outside like a TV show as a distraction. If you're looking at history from the outside like a TV show as a distraction, you're not alive in that history. If you're alive in that history, it's because the questions that form that history are alive for you. They're yours. You're actively engaged in them. And what he's saying is that your life is historical only if you're living on the plane of those historical questions, right? History is not an antiquarian interest to know something about the past. It's alive now, or it's not actually shaping anything. The history you only read about and only look at as a movie doesn't shape anything. The history that shapes things is what is still a live issue for you. And he's contrasting those two notions of history. He often says history and historiography. To be historical is to try to live in the stream of history with those questions alive for you, whereas to merely contemplate history like a movie is historiography. It's a nice scholarly activity that tickets and sorts the past the way museums ticket and sort, extinct organisms.
So I guess it follows then from his metric that basically, or almost no one then lives the correct way, or
from his point of view, the question is whether or not people are living their lives or not. That's the authenticity question, right? It's very easy to go through your whole life living, in the eyes of others for other people's purposes that have nothing to do with you and are not particularly yours. That's what all being time is about, right? So that's the underlying starting point. This is a place where he makes contact with, standard existentialism, right? He's starting from that reorientation having already happened. And then the question is, what is of actual living concern to you as really you? And the answer is something like the history or past that has actually shaped you and is still alive is part of your being. It's part of what you are, right? And you're either living that or you're not. If you're living that, then you are at least in the stream of history. Whether or not you do what you do there, whether or not what you do there is valuable or not, different question. But you're at least on the field. So his first height distinction, his first rank distinction, is who's on the field and who is, not even on the field. Does that help?
Yeah, it does.
Craig.
Yeah, so the thing that came up to me most definitely as we started going through this is that some 4 years before Heidegger wrote this, Edward Bernays wrote the book Propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And that has become rampant in our culture to the point that I would have to agree that is an inauthentic life that we're living when we're so inundated with constant propaganda, both in the material world of capitalism and in the political world of all the political ads going on right now. So I see a strong reality in what he's talking about the distortion and concealment leading away from truth and becoming a very inauthentic life because it's what we're living right now. I'm struggling with elevating that to a metaphysical principle or a more ontological principle. That's where I'm having a little bit of trouble with, and I see don't see the connection. I think I agree with you there. I don't see the connection of taking it back to philosophy has been wrong all this time. I think this is a fairly modern occurrence that I would say was probably affecting Heidegger very strongly also with the rise of Nazism in his own time frame too. Again, the masters of propaganda there, Goebbels and others that were just starting to make their way known. Is there some connection that
Yes.
we're missing there?
Oh, there's some connection. I don't know that we're missing it, but sure. So Heidegger's own understanding of this comes out most clearly in some of his essays on Nietzsche and things like The Question Concerning Technology. You have to understand that there's a kind of a background diagnosis of the nature of the modern West as suffering from nihilism that he's taking over from Nietzsche, that he's seeing as a more or less accurate cultural diagnosis, but he doesn't think that Nietzsche has understood its causes deeply enough, something like that. But that he, Heidegger, will put into his own metaphysical terms. So the characterization of what nihilism is that nothing is happening to being. And that is the situation in which man has lost all calling to and connection to truth and regards everything about truth and truth claims as a mere means for the manipulation of power dynamics in order to reorder orderable energy to achieve his desires. In other words, when everything thought-like is a technological instrument for power, that is, to Heidegger, a dissevering of man from anything like service to truth. It is a subordination of everything truth-like and cultural-like to material ends, political and otherwise. That is a symptom of nihilism, and it is nothing happening to being. What he means by nothing happening to being is that something like man's vocation to know the truth has withdrawn. It is off the field. And what you see afterwards is man without any service to truth. Man for whom truth is instrumental reason, to use the phrase from another tradition, right? So the cultural connection of his diagnosis of some of this dismissal aspects of the modern world, et cetera, that's the lens through he's seeing it through. He thinks that European culture is going through a phase of nihilism. He thinks that nihilism was more or less accurately diagnosed by Nietzsche, but that Nietzsche himself was a part of it because he did not understand it deeply enough. Because Nietzsche was, Nietzsche doesn't realize that his advocacy of will to power is just technology on steroids, and it's just nihilism on steroids, right? The thing which has actually been lost is any connection to or calling to truth. Right, so that's why he's writing this kind of thing right now at that time, right? And so you get plenty of this in his essays on Nietzsche. He's trying to take Nietzsche seriously in that diagnosis, but he's not trying to agree with him about anything like where you would go from it. Okay, so. That's just a basic background of where he is in that camp entire. Now, obviously, the propagandists around him are making avid use of Nietzsche. They're even trying to start making avid use of him, which is why he's occasionally denouncing those things when they're happening. I don't think that he is entirely sophisticated about all of that. He's not a learned cultural critic. He's a philosopher who understands the philosophy connections here more than he understands the political or cultural machination connections here. So he himself engages in his own forms of rhetoric that are borderline propagandistic at times. He has his own things he's appealing to. some of these tropes of appealing to a standard of connection to truth are things which are staples of a religious type of continental conservative before his time. He's just taken the religious accent off of it and put a philosophical accent on it. So, you know, there's a bunch of things like that going on to tie these things together. In his own understanding, though, the vocation to truth question is the central one, right? And he doesn't expect anything like cultural recovery without a change in that at that level. That's why he thinks that philosophical action is important here, right? Another way of putting it is that he doesn't think that the problem of propaganda is caused by propaganda. It's filling a void, filling a vacuum, and there's no way you're getting rid of the cultural power of propaganda as long as everyone thinks that everything about reason is purely instrumental, right? As long as they think that, that's going to be with you, right? Does that help?
Yeah, that makes me less thrilled about where America is today than where Heidegger's Germany was. You know, I think we are so enmeshed in that the idea of bringing up truth is just laughed at almost at this point. You know, I watch. You know.
So yes, but he's also immensely influential among the lines of thought that are in that direction. So, but which we can talk about some other time. But I think it's fair to say that people like Nietzsche and Heidegger were, you know, extreme pessimists on the cultural front, right? And not simply pessimists, but they did not expect good things from the 20th century, to take the case of Nietzsche. I think that the famous thing, as people doubtless remember, is in Heidegger's last interview was only a God can save us, and in the absence of the God, we are in decline. So he's acknowledging that there is no God saving us, and therefore we are in decline. That's sort of his take on contemporary cultural history in the 70s. But anyway, that's just, if you want to know the where they position the pieces on the board and that sort of thing. Nick, and then Pete.
Yeah. Pete's question, and also Craig's, I guess, kind of made me think of a word popped up. The idea of pseudonym and the idea of propaganda. Mm-hmm. The word that kind of came to my mind was the Greek word doxa, opinion. Mm-hmm. And I remember Arendt's claim that that really, and one can look at opinion in our discussion as a kind of distortion of the correct truth, all opinions, but we are inherently distorted opinion makers, I guess, in the sense that Arendt talks about, that we look at things at a certain angle. That's our limitation. We're always looking at what's confronting us is from our point of view. We cannot go around and see the whole thing. So our truth is always of that perspective. And so in one sense, everything that we have is really doxa. And the truth, we're always missing something in the truth. That's why we always.
You're going to love this dialogue when we get to it, right?
Yeah. So this is where the reason I bring this up is because I'm not pushing for propaganda, by the way, which is pretty abhorrent. But really, I think she has a point here. And there was no talk about doxa in our readings. And I think Socrates or Plato brings up doxa versus truth, I guess, aletheia. But in this particular article, there was no talk of doxa at all. But anyway, I'm thinking that it is in our nature to have this type of distortion as human beings. Can't be helped.
So if I may, so the reason I was holding this up with amusement is, the fundamental theses of, they're asking what is knowledge, right? And the first real argument they'll have for what knowledge is that it's perception. and they'll cite Protagoras, man is the measure of all things, of things that are, that they are, and of things are not, they are not, which is the characteristic Greek sophistic understanding of perception and personal understanding and, you know, perspectival relativism, something like that. And they will consider that argument for, you know, pages and pages. It's taken extremely seriously. And then they will consider other candidates for knowledge besides perception, including right opinion. And there's a question of whether or not an opinion, if it happens to be right, is knowledge, and or is it not? And the often given thing is that it has to have some reason that can be given for it, not just that it happens to be right. In the Republic, where he's saying, when he's asking him, you know, to give his own opinion, he says, opinions without knowledge are like a man who blindly goes on the right road. Right. That's but the other thing that is the realm of the perceptibles about the things themselves is said to be the realm of, in the Republic again, the quote knowledge unquote that people have about it is pistis, it's faith. It's not actual knowledge. There's only knowledge about the realm of the intelligibles. The perceptibles, there's images and there's imagination and there's faith. There's not knowledge, right? And that's just in the nature of the thing itself known, that it's not susceptible to true knowledge to Plato. But those are the kinds of questions that we'll be wrestling with in this one, and doxa will be important by the end of it, certainly, and we'll get all of the, you know, Greek take on perspectival relativism and all that kind of stuff. The academy, right after Plato's own time, was famously the skeptical academy, right? They were all about limiting truth claims in order to avoid saying things untrue. It can be debated how faithful that was to Plato himself, but it was certainly a place that the academics, that was the original academics, took Platonism in immediately after Plato himself, was towards this skepticism of not making truth claims that you couldn't support, sort of thing. Anyway, that all of those will be live issues we'll be considering here. I don't think that Heidegger here is wrong to leave out doxa when he's trying to talk about the cave and the idea of the good. It was there a bit in the cave, right? It was the hidden, distorted understanding of things in the cave. Although how distorted even the natural understandings of things are for Plato is an open question. To Plato, our understanding of things which are not intelligible in themselves always has something of opinion about it. Only certain things are fully knowable. Not all things are fully knowable. You also get doctrines of this in the pre-Socratics, people like Parmenides, I'm thinking of. But the other place where Heidegger deals with it a lot is in his book on the Sophist, which we might get to at some point in the future. But
what is that book again, Jason?
Sorry, this is Heidegger on Plato's Sophist.
Oh, Plato's Sophist.
So yes, Plato's Sophist is part of the trilogy of Theaetetus, Sophist, and Statesman. It's like the dialogue immediately following this one, and it's also the one where the notion that being is something like power or dynamis is elaborated most fully not by Socrates, but by a character called the Parmenidean stranger. It's also where they consider the sophist as a type, and the meion, or the sort of half not being, something like that. Anyway, the point is, a bunch of these problematics are there in Theaetetus and Sophist, and we might consider them in the future. But we'll get more to those things when we get to the Theaetetus itself. Pete.
In the second half, just a quick follow-up. In the second half of this book we're reading, though, since it's Theaetetus, does Heidegger go into doxa at all?
Of course he'll talk about doxa, but we're going to read the Theaetetus first. But when he's talking about the Theaetetus, he will definitely talk about doxa. Yeah. Pete.
Yeah, so with regard to the question of, truth and falsity in terms of propaganda or facts versus opinion, I think the answer, and Heidegger's answer, I'm going to quote him in a second, is not through, we're going to uncover the truth through better methods or appeals to authority or anything like that. Heidegger says that what philosophy's response is questioning, which in a fundamental way changes Dasein. So when you're confronted with something you believe to be not the case, the answer is not, oh, I have a better authority or whatever. A philosopher's response is to start asking questions, guiding questions that will lead the person to realize the inconsistency or the problems with what they took to be the truth. And that will lead them to change their own mind rather than telling them, oh, that's a propaganda, don't believe it.
Sure. I would add and themselves, right? So the philosopher doesn't just change other people's existence with questions; they change their own existence with questions. But yes, questioning that changes their existence is the philosophical understanding here. But that's the same as saying there's a kind of faith here or presupposition that thoughtful questioning, if honest thoughtful questioning, will transform existence and will transform existence in something like a right way. And how right the way is, that's left of history to decide, something like that. But that's the underlying connection to truth I was talking about with Craig, is not that you have it or that you own it, but that you are looking for it and that you are committed to it and that you let it be in charge in your questioning, as opposed to what propagandists do, which is they ask questions to distort and manipulate the people around them and the world to achieve their other ends that have nothing to do with truth. Right, that's sort of the definition of that activity. But anyway, that's the difference in the orientations. Dan.
Yeah, related to this the same topic. Like there were the sophists going around and doing what they were doing, and then there is Socrates, I don't know, going and asking the shoemaker about the idea of the shoe, or the bed maker about the idea of the bed, and that made them very uncomfortable. Like Socrates ended up dead because of that. Like he was onto something there. So, and probably the entire this cave allegory, so it's may be written as a parable for what happened to Socrates. So it's a political, and it's where the truth and the political and everything meet. When you go into that kind of questioning, like idea of the shore, idea of the bed, that's the yeah. I guess
I agree with you.
By their concept. Yes, sorry.
I was just going to say, it's usually not the shoe or the bed that gets the giant reaction. It's more like virtue and knowledge. But sorry, keep going.
No, it was by their consequences. It means that Socrates was and Plato was onto something and not others, judging by what happened and the consequences and how they ended up.
Yes, but I mean, it's worth pointing out though that some of these pure differences in calling and rank have political and moral effects, not always the intended ones. Some of the students around Socrates and some of people around Plato, right, were involved in the 30 after the Athenians lost the war with Sparta, and they were called on the carpet for it, and Socrates resisted them while they were in power. But afterwards, the people that put him on trial were people who were basically the enemies of the 30, right? And they associated Socrates with the political actions of his students, why were his students that way? In part because of a kind of elitist arrogance they had learned from his school, right? Not his intention, but Charmides was one of them. He was one of the leaders of the 30, and there's a dialogue about him, and he is a charming young man who is enamored of Socrates and vice versa, but he's also not very moderate. You similarly see stuff when Plato in the 7th letter talks about his own affairs on Sicily, right? The fundamental thing is that the tyrant of Syracuse wants to think well of himself and wants to flatter himself that he has understood these deep philosophical doctrines of Plato almost instantly, and he is also suspicious of the people around Socrates who have been taught to live a more moderate life or something, because they put on airs and that makes them dangerous, and maybe they want to overthrow him. And there's both suspicion and competition for status involved in associating with this foreign philosopher and so on. And that all has political consequences too. And they're not necessarily the ones that Plato intends, right? But it's not simply that these people get persecuted because they propound the idea of the shoe and people are disturbed by it, right? It's that they teach that many of the people around you are full of it to a bunch of arrogant young men who decide to take over the city. And then when people react to those arrogant young men, they also react to the philosophers who taught them to be arrogant, right? I'm not trying to say that this is an excuse of the persecution of the former students of philosophers. I'm saying that the political and cultural action here gets convoluted, right?
Jason, I think you lost your sound.
I lost my sound?
No, you didn't.
I'm fine. I think you lost our sound. You're the one whose screen froze. So I think you have a connection problem, Joe. So I want to type to Joe. Joe, you have a connection problem. Okay. Sorry, someone else had their hand up. Welcome, Will, from the sunny coast of the land of Oz. Does that mean you're off in Australia?
Yes.
Oh,
100
welcome.
100
Long way away.
kilometers. Yeah, 100 kilometers north of Brisbane.
Okay, I even know where that is.
I was hoping you would. We're here.
Well, welcome. A little late. There's someone. I think I've passed over someone. Ryan, were you trying to say something in there, or did we get to everybody? Okay. I've actually gotten through the parts I wanted to get through of part 3, but the next thing I want to do is give people a chance to ask questions. I know that there's always some things people have as questions going in, and some will have been covered in the discussion, others not. So the passages that you highlighted that were incomprehensible and you want to gloss on, or anything like that.
I'm wondering if we should linger some more over Pete's comment and Dan's, I think. I think it's a hope. Oh,
I'm sorry. Pete's, which of Pete's comments?
Well, because Pete's hopeful that the way to respond to these
This question,
propaganda and lies is to ask questions, like the philosopher, like Socrates asking questions and so forth. Of course, Dan brings up that could be dangerous as well, as maybe as so. I'm not saying
don't do it because it's dangerous. I'm just saying don't expect that the universe is always so aligned that it will always work.
Well, I'm wondering how pragmatic is it? Is that really will that really work? I mean, will philosophic questions or questions be actually working for the people that are, shall we say, subjected to propaganda? That they can they actually think outside, or can they actually respond and think through the questions that you will ask?
I can tell you my own opinion and Plato's, right? Which is that if you attempt to instruct someone who is willing to be instructed, you can have all the faith in the world that you will get there. And if they're not interested and willing to take the instruction, you should give it up as a worthless waste of time. It's entirely voluntary on the part of the student, and you can't force it on anyone. That's my own experience.
But the instruction could be propaganda.
Sorry?
The instruction could be propaganda.
I'm pointing out a difference between the genuine questioning and the way that philosophy acts versus the way propaganda acts. Philosophy is incapable of working on an unwilling subject. It doesn't even try, and it will fail if it tries to, right? The student has to be willing to learn. He has to, and if that willingness is not there, it's words wasted. That's my own experience, and it's Plato's own clear teaching as well. I don't know that Heidegger particularly gives it, but I think he would probably agree. Ryan and then Jim.
Sure. So this is kind of a question about, I guess, Heidegger's method. I don't think I fully, well, I know I didn't fully grasp why is knowing untruth so fundamental to knowing truth itself for Heidegger?
Got it.
I didn't really
yes.
grasp that.
Great question. So this is taking us to the three sections. So the basic story is that we learn a bunch of things about truth directly. In the very intro to the whole book, we had this a common everyday notion of truth these days as truth is correspondence. The correspondence between a thought and a thing is the version that you get in the medievals, and something like a speech which is adequate to the nature of the thing is what you get in Aristotle, something like that. And then Heidegger points out that that's not what it meant to the Greeks. To the original Greeks, it meant something like unveiledness or uncoveredness, and it was about the things themselves and not about speeches about them. And so Heidegger's original question is, how the heck does something like that change? Right? Why do we have these two notions? What's the relationship between them, and how did it change? And in the course of all this, he discovers, or unveils, whatever, that the unveiledness notion of truth was the more primitive one, was the more basic one. Truth as uncoveredness is the more primitive notion, the more underlying notion, the more primary notion of what truth is, upon which truth as correctness is itself based as a kind of limitation of it, something like that. So that's all background before we even get to this section, right? We've seen that before in sort of the part one, even before we got to the allegory of the cave. And then what he's getting on at here is that because concealment is essential to that primitive notion of truth, you have to ask, what's the opposite of truth, right? If you're thinking of truth as unconcealment, then the opposite of it is concealment. And if you're thinking of truth as correctness, then the opposite of it is incorrectness. So the two different notions of truth line up with two different opposites. One opposite of truth is the concealed, right? Mystery, something like that, as not yet unveiled, or as already forgotten, or in any other way, just still concealed. And the other is false, distorted, incorrect, not adequate speech, not adequate to the thing, something like that. So there's multiple ways in which those notions change. One is it about the thing, and the other is it about the speech. But also, is it about correctness, or is it about unconcealment? But they also have different opposites. And so what Heidegger says is it is by tracking how the opposite changed that you can see most clearly where the notion of the positive sense of truth changed. Positive sense of truth A and positive sense of truth B differ in their opposites. So track what the different philosophers or different thinkers thought about untruth, and you will see what they thought about truth. So he's using the obverse side of truth, what people think of as the opposite of truth, to reveal how they're thinking about truth itself, right? So that's the reason that he brings up in the first place. So what counts as untrue? And to the more primitive notion of what counts as untrue, if truth is unconcealment, what first counts as untrue is concealment. And concealment doesn't have to have any sense of distortion or any sense of falsity. It can just have the sense of undiscovered, kind of the sense of previous mystery. And the idea that truth is something which occurs as a lightening up in a background of unknown, and that being fundamental to the notion of truth, the discovery notion of truth, for Heidegger, it keeps these notes of historical happening, happening to a mind, all of that. Whereas the notion of the falsity of a piece of speech, you know, could be something disembodied enough to be proved by a theorem prover or something. It's something about the speech. It's disconnected from anything about its history. So there's all these different ways in which the notions differ from one another, but he's bringing them out by contrasting what counts as untruth in view A or view B. Does that help?
Yeah, it'll take probably a rewatch for that all to, you know, permeate.
Sure. Okay, Jim and then Carlos.
Yeah, so Ryan just kind of beat me to the punch on that. I'd mentioned it earlier. So that was a good summary of that question. Maybe most of the other questions were answered already. Well, to a good degree. So what I wanted to make sure I understood properly, not just because I love Kierkegaard, but I want to make sure I understand. He uses that example to, Kierkegaard uses the pseudonyms so that he can sort of trick his readers into reading what he has to say without judging. And also to be able to frame the characters that he uses in a way that is true to the way those characters would be, and either or whatever. One person's an aesthete, and the other one's an ethical person, and he does that for literary purposes or whatever. And Heidegger's saying that there's nothing wrong with that. And in fact, that's a good way to suspend people's, not say disbelief, keep them from automatically being in opposition. Especially with Kierkegaard in his day, a lot of people didn't like him, especially the newspapers. So anyway, I want to make sure I understood correctly. The mentioning of Kierkegaard was as an example of how you can use concealment without it being a distortion and actually towards a good end.
Well, okay, so I mean, it is concealing, but he's giving pseudos here. Pseudos normally is read as false or fake, and this is a false name. It's not Kierkegaard's own name, right? But he is showing a purpose, which is, if you like, innocent or philosophical. He calls it under the protection of an assumed name. He also mentions the name itself is correct, but in another sense. And his point of that is that Kierkegaard always picks his pseudonyms for a purpose, right? It's part of the text itself. It's part of the composition that it be ascribed to someone with this or that background, position, you know, cultural notes, whatever expectations about him. So why is Heidegger citing that? Heidegger is citing that both to bring out the most, you know, the people around him, where they'll be used to the Greek notion of pseudo, right? It's the pseudo that will be closest to them. So it's just explaining why they thought of this as their opposite, a word for truth. But also he's dissociating it a little bit from the incorrect in the sense of the, you know, simply flat out false in some positivist sense, right? It's a notion of the fake or the hiding that has a valid literary purpose, something like that. This is one of the points that Pete was bringing out. So I think that's why he picks it, both because it's the most the easiest accessible example of what pseudo will mean to the people in the class, but it's also pointing out that pseudo in that sense doesn't have to mean something like just clumsily, stupidly false, right? Nor does it have to mean something like maliciously false. Does that help? Okay. I think Carlos was next, and then Craig.
Yeah, even in the sense of truth as correctness, there is an implicit call for further definition of truth. Because how do you establish what's correct? Do you follow what I'm trying to get at?
I am, but in the notion of truth as correctness that he gave at the very beginning, right, which is the sort of commonsensical understanding of his day, and kind of the sense of the positivists that you also get there in the back to Aristotle, right? There's the correspondence is especially between a state of affairs in the world and language about it. It's the statements that have truth content when they try to claim something about the world. So the correspondence is not between two states of affairs or between one set of words and another set of words. It's between a set of words and a state of affairs. And all of the sort of philosophical doctrines about truth in the epistemological set like that are all about how you get sets of statements and states of affairs to come into correspondence with one another, right? But the thing that they're primarily thinking about is a correspondence between a set of words and a state of affairs. And that's why Heidegger is pointing out that in that understanding, truth is a property of statements, not of things. And truth occurs in something like a mental realm of, a subjective mental realm, rather than, being something objective. And that's all stuff you already find in Aristotle, right? He's not wrong about that theory of truth being the kind of theory of truth that you find in Aristotle. And that it also influences the scholastics and the modern continental philosophers, sorry, not continental, academic, Anglo-Saxon philosophers, I would say, right? Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Craig.
So the question I'm struggling or trying to get a better sense of is page 113, where he deals with lethe in the genuine Greek sense is not a lived experience. The Greeks, thank God, knew no such thing, but is a fateful occurrence that overtakes human beings. An occurrence, however, that pertains to all beings. They fall into hiddenness, they withdraw, they are simply absent. And then a little bit later, he mentions down about 2/3 of the way down, or almost 3/4, what is important for us is that lethe means an objective occurrence which affects man in his existence, which comes over him and seizes him, i.e., which intervenes in the manifestness of beings. And objectively occurring goneness of beings is the condition of the possibility of someone no longer knowing anything. The external sense of this happening to humans really struck me. I haven't seen that in a lot of in much other Greek history or discussions of the Greeks, that they got basically subdued by fate in a sense, and I'm struggling with trying to make sense of is this Heidegger's imposition of an idea on the Greeks, or is it very common within the Greeks that they were fated to this occurrence of non-being to them?
Not necessarily the fated to the occurrence of non-being. That's the particular event he's talking about of this, one of the things that happens to people who had the plague at Athens. That's in the text he's talking about. First of all, just want to mention in passing, the thank God they knew nothing about lived experience is one of those digs to the philosophers of his time who are following after the things he's just done in Being in Time, and buzzwording what he wrote 5 years ago, and that are driving him nuts, right? So that's almost a throwaway brickbat of a line, but he's trying to say that they were not thinking of this as being a subjective experience is the main thing he's trying to get across. So if you leave aside the snide toward the people around him, right? He's trying to say the Greeks did not experience these things as subjective occurrences occurring inside minds that they thought of as inside brains, inside heads, right? None of that was there. These were things which fell out in the world maybe in the Heideggerian sense, but in the world, and they happened to seize people. The place where that's very common among the Greeks is a lot of their understanding of, if I can put it this way, pathological mental phenomena, were what we would call, what they would think of as theological occurrences. It was God-induced, right? It was love was when love was the madness of frenzy when the God of love seized you, right? And it wasn't that you personally subjectively experienced love. It was that love, which is this big thing way bigger than you, that's why everybody can experience it, right, happened to you particularly, right? it's a bigger objective thing. That's why it's, you know, in a Jungian archetype fashion, it's way bigger than you, right? But it can take possession of you, right? So lethe as something that can befall someone, just as forgetfulness is something that can befall them, right? Lethe in that sense is a goddess of forgetfulness. But independent of that, there's also just the objective occurrence of or existence of oblivion, irrespective of any subjective state, right? It's not just talking about, you know, God possession things as a theory of matter or something like that. Before you're there to experience it, the thing that you haven't experienced is in oblivion to you and to everyone else, right? The background, the oblivion background is there before there is consciousness, right? So when he's talking about the objective occurrence of these things, he's not just talking about something which is an ancient theological semi-Jungian understanding of a psychological state. It's also just a literal objective occurrence, right? The mystery is there before anyone knows it's a mystery, right? The realm of the unknown predates humanity, right? The original stage is all dark. There are no lights of consciousness on it anywhere, right? And if some lights of consciousness turn on later, they're small candles in the background of dark, right? So that sense of the objective occurrence of the prior night is very prevalent in Greek metaphysics and Greek philosophy, and especially the pre-Socratics. But it's also clearly there in their theological concepts, if I can put it that way. The tower on which they build things of, you know, which thing comes before which. So and that's also there in their understanding of afterlife or experience of death and all those sorts of things. So I don't know if that helps, but when he's saying that they don't think of these things as things which happen to them, but as things which happen to the beings themselves, he is being true to Greek metaphysics and Greek theology, right? We pre-philosophical, you know, mythological Greek thinking already has that in spades.
That helps. There's sometimes when I think that Jung got carried away with his idealism in creating archetypes and didn't deal with the historical understanding of people being overcome by such situations. And so I that's what kind of triggered it for me is we get a little too idealistic and easygoing with archetypes when in fact we have a much more dynamic power that we have no control over.
Well, but both ways. I mean, the other way of putting it is Jung's attempt to understand these things is psychological and scientific in some modern ways too, and that's not there in the older metaphysics, right? But that also means that some of the things which he thinks might have to be human universals might be more culturally bound than he thinks. It's just a very old culture. So, yeah.
If it's a universal experience in numerous cultures, it could be much more than universal. It can be still cultural, and that's where I've been. That's what I've been gnawing with some of Jung's ideas is just how universal is universal, and so that's an aside. But it struck me when I
mean, but the other
Greeks were that way. Yeah,
there's a tendency of people, I would say, modern Nietzscheans is the way I put it. There's any modern Nietzscheans to think that if something is psychological or has a psychological component or a mental component, then it's a matter of opinion. It is culture bound. It is changeable and has no roots in anything older or deeper than that, right? And this is a complete falsification of all of history, right? There's the world and human thought are more intertwined than that, and that's one of the places where some of this stuff, like the analysis of Dasein, is very useful, because you realize that the structure of human experience is not shaped only by subjective factors. It is shaped far more by objective factors, right? By unchanging structural factors of being an embodied intelligence, plugged into a stable world that has order in it and all those sorts of things, right? And those aspects are not they can be as psychological as you want, but they're not culturally determined at all. They're structural.
Yeah, well, and the struggle I have is too much reading about the universality of stories of the flood and such things like that. It may not be as peaceful and ordered a world as we uniformitarians nowadays want to make it out to be. But that's another thread to pull on.
Fair
and
enough.
That the Greeks have that, the Indians have that, the Indians have
when I think of ordered, I'm not thinking of never subject to catastrophe. I'm thinking in terms of there's a I remember reading one guy who was talking about a medieval philosopher, and he was trying to contrast that medieval philosopher with the teaching of Descartes. And at one point, he was casually remarking about the unassisted human mind would not arrive at et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I just recall reading it and thinking, no such animal, right? Human minds are always assisted by the world into which they are plugged, right? And they always have much that they they're always assisted.
And the ones that are our ancestors are the ones that survived whatever happened.
True. Okay, Dan.
Well, first, a brief comment regarding what you just say. So I finished the Zolicon seminars, and there Heidegger is trying to build up psychology away from the subject, from the substance, from rational animal, and whatever Freud and even Jung did. I found that interesting, and I think there is such a psychology based on Dasein. And there is a school of psychology out there that is Heideggerian. I found that interesting. And going back to like the issue why Heidegger try to put the untrue first and try to make the distinction in untrue rather than in true. So to me, I agree with what you said, but I will see it slightly differently. So that is both true as aletheia and true as correspondence. They kind of overlap as concepts. They refer to the same thing, even if the aletheia is the fundamental one, is the richer one, and the correspondence is kind of the poorer and the derivative one. So in a way they overlap. However, when you take their negation, like what's the falsehood versus concealment, they live in different spaces. So it's very clear to show the difference there in the negation as opposed to the positive side. So to me at least, that's how I understood Heidegger's preference to start with untruth and not with truth, to distinguish the two. And that's it.
Yeah, and it's fair to say this is a staple method of certain schools of German idealism. You find this in Hegel all the time, right? And occasionally in Nietzsche. And they're not the only ones. You can also find examples of it back in the ancients as well. But it was definitely something that you find in earlier German idealism, is this focus on the freedom conferred on the meaning of a concept based upon the possible differently oriented axes of its negative. That's like phenomenology of mind. The Hegel's phenomenology of spirit is all about that. Okay. Other questions on the part 3? Okay, we're at 4 hours. Will, I want to welcome you and give you a few comments on just things we already talked about at the beginning. So we're reading this book, of course, but this book, the next second half of it is all Heidegger's take on the Platonic dialogue, the Theaetetus. So before we continue in this book, we're going to take a break from him and read the Theaetetus itself that he's commenting on. So this is going to be the next book that we're reading, which is Platonic Dialogue. I'll put out the details about how far we're going to get into it, but fundamentally it's where Theodorus takes over the conversation is where we're going to break. And this is the Joe Sachs translation, which Pete recommended last time, and I've checked it out. It's pretty good. It's available on Amazon. I'll have a bunch of things up on the meetup for the next meeting about times and so forth. And details of how far in the work. But the reason we're doing that is because this is breaking from his exposition of Plato in the Republic, Allegory of the Cave and Idea of the Good, to Plato in the Theaetetus. So before he switches to Theaetetus, we're going to read the Theaetetus. That's the idea. But welcome. Any questions about any of that, or?
That's good. And will the link to the reading material be in the group, on the group page? Will there be a link?
It will be, but it'll be for the new meeting. It'll be on the group page when I put up the new meeting. We haven't scheduled it yet, but the next meeting, I'll put it on a link to that one.
Okay. Oh, great.
Yeah, and then in addition, the recording of this one will be as a link below this one's.
Thank you.
Yeah, both of those things on Meetup. The next thing we should talk about is when we're going to meet next. So I realize some people need to get a text from Amazon. I don't think it takes that long to get a text from Amazon, but we could do 3 weeks or 4 weeks. 3 weeks would have us being at the 14th of August, and 3 weeks would have us being, sorry, 4 weeks would have us being the 21st of August. I could do either of those. 21st might be a little bit easier for me, but do people have preferences between the 14th and 21st of August for our next session?
I vote for the 21st, but I'm open to the other one as well.
Okay.
I would vote for 21st as well, because I'm going to be out of town the weekend of the 14th.
Okay, well, that's two pretty strong votes for 21st. Anyone object to the 21st? Okay, in that case, we're gonna, without objection, so ordered, as they say. We're gonna be reading this, the beginning of the Theaetetus for next time. I'll get you the actual Stephanus page numbers. We'll be using this edition, but whenever we're referring to parts of it, instead of using just the pages from the edition, since some people might have a different translation, I'll be using the Stephanus pages on the side, like 174a, etc., to refer to how far we're supposed to read in the dialogue. I imagine that we would do this in no more than 3 sessions, and maybe in 2, but probably 3 sessions for the Theaetetus. But it's a fun dialogue. We've talked a little bit about what's in it. The fundamental theory question is, what is knowledge? And we get introduced to Pythagoras and his famous saying that man is the measure of all things, of things that are, that they are, and of things that are not, that they are not, which also is kind of the classic of ancient relativism. We get Socrates' arguments against that. We get several different positive theories of knowledge, including the famous wax tablet model of memory, and also the Avery model of memory. That is a little bird cage with different birds in it. So if you find the wrong bird. And then notions of knowledge, relationship between knowledge and opinion. Dear to Nick's heart, will be taken up seriously in the second half of the dialogue. The Theaetetus occurs in a trio of dialogues: Theaetetus, Sophist, Statesman, which are usually thought of as a group because the action presented in them is presented as happening over a group series of days. In the Sophist and Statesman, they say they'll have 3 people that they want to have dialogues about: the Sophist, the Statesman, and the Philosopher. There's no dialogue called the Philosopher. The nearest thing there is to a dialogue called the Philosopher in Plato is the Theaetetus. Theaetetus himself, the dialogue is named after, is one of the young men who appears in the dialogue and is talking to Socrates. The other 2 in the trilogy, Socrates is a silent witness, and you instead have the Parmenidean stranger in charge. But this one, Socrates is in charge, and he's talking with Theaetetus, a young Socrates, who has the same name but doesn't look like him. Theaetetus looks like him but doesn't have the same name, and their teacher Theodorus. Theodorus is a mathematician from Cyrene in North Africa, who's teaching these promising young students at Athens. And Theaetetus is the young man who is his interlocutor for much of the dialogue. Theaetetus was a famous mathematician in his own right in his later life. He's thought to be responsible for much of one of the books of Euclid dealing with irrational numbers. So irrational numbers in geometric form. An accomplished mathematician, basically, is the character of Theaetetus. So here we see him as a young man with all of his promising intellect and ability to reason logically and all that kind of stuff being put through its paces by Socrates on the subject of what is knowledge. But picking a famous mathematician when he was a young man is a conscious choice. The action of the dialogue presents all this is happening right as Theaetetus has just died, but also claims that the whole thing was recorded soon after the fact by one of our narrators, who says he checked it repeatedly with Socrates, and Socrates made sure it was right. So to the extent that there's a Platonic dialogue that comes down to us with the pretense that it has been checked by Socrates himself for its accuracy, this is the standard. Okay, so that's just a little bit of background on the Theaetetus itself, and we should have fun with it. All right, any other comments or thoughts before we sign off for this time?
No, thank you.
All right, I'll put this up later tonight, and thanks everyone. See you guys next time.
See you.